Hey friends, welcome. What if the most controversial biblical film in history is about to return? Bigger, bolder, and more mystical than ever. Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. Resurrection isn't just a sequel, it's a daring journey into the unknown. The 3 days between Jesus' death and resurrection. And today we're breaking it all down. Storyline, cast, behind the scenes, and the cosmic vision that's about to shake cinema again. 1. Legacy of the Passion. A story that shook the world. When The Passion of the Christ was released in 2004, no one could have predicted the seismic impact it would have, not just in Hollywood, but across the globe. Directed by Mel Gibson and starring Jim Caviezel as Jesus, the film became one of the most talked about and polarizing faith-based movies in cinematic history. At its core, The Passion was a visceral retelling of the final 12 hours of Jesus' life. But it didn't just tell the story. It branded it onto the conscience of its viewers. Raw, relentless, and reverent. The film stirred audiences to tears, inspired deep spiritual reflection, and for many, reignited conversations about faith, suffering, and salvation. A box office miracle. On a modest budget of $30 million, The Passion of the Christ defied every expectation, grossing over $600 million worldwide, including $370 million in the US alone. It remains to this day the highest-grossing R-rated movie in US box office history. For a film spoken entirely in ancient languages, Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin, this was nothing short of a miracle. Evangelical communities championed the film as a divine tool for evangelism. Churches rented out entire theaters. Families returned for repeat viewings. It wasn't just a movie, it was a spiritual event. And for many believers, it was the first time they saw Jesus' suffering portrayed with such brutal, unflinching honesty. But not everyone saw it that way. Controversy, critics, and culture wars. While The Passion moved millions, it also ignited an equally powerful backlash. Critics accused the film of being excessively violent, one of the most graphic depictions of torture ever put to screen. Renowned critic Roger Ebert called it the most violent film I have ever seen. Others took issue with its historical accuracy and theological liberties, but the most intense criticism came from Jewish groups and interfaith leaders who believed the film portrayed Jewish figures in an unfairly villainous light, fueling accusations of anti-Semitism. These controversies were only amplified by Mel Gibson's own public scandals, including comments he made that many viewed as anti-Semitic. As a result, The Passion became more than just a movie. It became a lightning rod. One that exposed deep divisions not just in religious interpretation, but in how sacred stories are told on screen. A defining role for Jim Caviezel. For Jim Caviezel, The Passion was both a breakthrough and a burden. His portrayal of Jesus was physically and emotionally demanding. He endured extreme conditions on set, including hypothermia, a dislocated shoulder, and even being struck by lightning during filming. The commitment was total. At one point, Caviezel used his own blood during a crucifixion scene for authenticity. But while the role defined his career artistically, it also came with a price. Caviezel later revealed that he was rejected by Hollywood after the film's release, struggling to find major roles. Still, he never expressed regret for taking on the part. For him, portraying Jesus was a calling, not a job, a cinematic turning point. The Passion of the Christ changed the rules for religious filmmaking. Before its release, Christian movies were often relegated to niche audiences, low production values, and limited distribution. Gibson's film proved that faith-based stories could be told with cinematic excellence, artistic depth, and mainstream success. It also paved the way for other religious films like God's Not Dead, Heaven is for Real, and War Room, none of which would have had the same cultural visibility without the path The Passion carved out. More than that, it challenged the idea that movies about Jesus had to be sanitized, soft-spoken, or sentimental. It dared to show the blood, the pain, and the brutality of the crucifixion, forcing audiences to confront the physical horror of what Christians believe Jesus endured for humanity's sake. The unfinished story. Yet for all its power, The Passion ended on a brief, almost silent note, a single moment of the resurrected Christ stepping out of the tomb. That glimpse left a lingering question. What happened next? For years, Mel Gibson hinted that the story wasn't over, that what came after the suffering was equally important, if not more so. But bringing that vision to life would take time, courage, and a cinematic scale unlike anything he'd attempted before. And now, nearly 2 decades later, the long-awaited continuation is finally taking form. The sequel's burden and promise, The Passion of the Christ. Resurrection is more than a sequel. It's an attempt to reclaim and expand the legacy of the original, but it also carries the weight of expectation, controversy, and devotion. Can lightning strike twice? Can a sequel achieve the same spiritual and cultural impact as the first? Or will it be torn apart by the same debates and new ones? That's the challenge ahead. But if there's one thing Gibson, Caviezel, and their team have proven, it's that they're not afraid of bold, dangerous storytelling. They've done it before. Now they're preparing to do it again. 2. Vision of the sequel. Beyond the tomb, into the unknown. The ending of The Passion of the Christ was as quiet as it was powerful. A brief glimpse of Jesus emerging from the tomb, his body glowing with the light of resurrection. There were no words, no music, just presence. That silence left a question echoing across cinema and faith alike. What happened next? Now, nearly 2 decades later, director Mel Gibson is answering that question. Not with whispers, but with a roar. This is not just a sequel. It's a theological odyssey, a cinematic resurrection. And if Gibson's vision is realized, it may change. It's saying it how the resurrection of Jesus is depicted for generations to come. A sequel, years in the making. Talks of a follow-up to The Passion began as early as 2016. But it wasn't until screenwriter Randall Wallace, known for Braveheart and We Were Soldiers, officially confirmed he was co-writing the sequel with Gibson that fans began to believe it might actually happen. Wallace, a devout Christian and master of emotionally driven epic storytelling, said it best. The Passion is only the beginning. There's so much more to tell. Gibson himself referred to the sequel as a massive undertaking. By early development stages, the project had already gone through multiple drafts. In an interview, Jim Caviezel revealed he had received the 3rd draft and called it the most powerful script I've ever read. By the 5th revision, production was officially gearing up and the vision was clear. This would be something the world had never seen before. Caviezel went even further, boldly stating, "This is going to be the biggest film in world history." It wasn't hyperbole. It was a declaration of intent, the resurrection, and what lies beneath. At the heart of The Passion of the Christ, resurrection is a simple but profound question. What did Jesus do between the cross and the empty tomb? According to most modern Christian traditions, Jesus descended into hell, not in defeat, but in triumph. This event, known as the harrowing of hell, is a brief reference in Scripture, 1 Peter chapter 3, 19-20, but a deeply rooted belief in early Christian theology and Catholic mysticism. Gibson intends to dramatize this journey, not as a mere metaphor, but as a cosmic spiritual battle. This isn't a quiet Sunday morning sunrise. It's war. The harrowing of hell, a spiritual war on screen. In Catholic visionary accounts, especially the writings of Anne Catherine Emmerich and Mary of Jesus of Agreda, Jesus, after his death, descends into the realm of the dead. There, he confronts the forces of darkness, tears down the gates of hell, and frees the souls of the righteous who awaited redemption. These vivid, mystical visions describe a battlefield where angels and demons clash, and where Jesus, no longer a suffering servant, stands as a conquering king. It's this spiritual warfare that Gibson wants to bring to the screen, a visual and emotional counterbalance to the agony of the Passion. If the first film portrayed Christ's physical suffering, the sequel aims to portray his spiritual victory. Reports suggest that we'll see scenes of Jesus walking among the ancient dead, rescuing prophets, saints, and the innocent. The underworld may be rendered not just as fire and torment, but as a surreal, otherworldly realm filled with shadows, whispers, and radiant light breaking through darkness. If done right, it will be nothing short of biblical fantasy, a blend of theology and mythology that dares to depict the unseen world of eternity. A non-linear structure, time, heaven, and cosmic juxtaposition. One of the most intriguing revelations is that the sequel will not follow a linear narrative. Gibson has hinted that the film will move between realms and dimensions, between earth, hell, and heaven. Time may fold in on itself. Events may be told through overlapping visions. The central axis is the resurrection, but around it, a whirlwind of spiritual realities unfold. This storytelling choice mirrors ancient theological understanding that God exists outside time, and that the resurrection is not just a historical moment, but a cosmic one. It's a bold approach, one that could confuse some audiences, but could also elevate the film to artistic and spiritual greatness. Inspirations from cinema and scripture. Gibson is known to study not just theology, but filmic language. And there are whispers that his influences for this sequel include unexpected sources, from The Tree of Life and Interstellar to Dark City and even The Dark Crystal. He's fascinated with light and shadow, spiritual metaphor, and non-linear reality. At the same time, the film will remain grounded in spiritual literature. Emmerich's visions will again provide source material. So too will ancient texts, such as the Gospel of Nicodemus, which expands on Jesus' descent into the underworld. The balance of scripture, mysticism, and cinematic creativity is delicate. But in Gibson's hands, it may produce something unique, a film that feels both ancient and futuristic. A resurrection. Unlike any other audiences may expect the traditional white-robed Jesus stepping out of a glowing tomb. But Gibson has never been one for safe imagery. There are rumors of two possible approaches. 1. The Radiant Christ, an ethereal Jesus, de-aged through visual effects, glowing with divine perfection. 2. The Wounded Victor, a resurrected Christ still bearing the scars of crucifixion, torn, weathered, and yet unbreakable. Each option carries symbolic power. One emphasizes divinity, the other humanity. Both could stir powerful emotion, especially in the context of triumph over darkness. And that may be the point. Resurrection is not the erasure of pain, but the redemption of it. A vision with risk and power. This vision is not without risk. Straying too far from scripture could alienate evangelical audiences. Going too mystical could spark theological backlash, and turning resurrection into fantasy could leave critics scoffing. But Mel Gibson has never made films to please everyone. He makes them to pierce the heart. This sequel, if executed with the same intensity and sincerity as The Passion, could become something cinema rarely delivers. A film that dares to imagine the eternal. A film that reaches into the mystery of resurrection and pulls out not just theology, but transcendence. 3. Spiritual warfare and theological depth. The descent into darkness. If The Passion of the Christ focused on the physical, resurrection will dive deep into the spiritual. At the center of Mel Gibson's vision lies a haunting question rarely explored on screen. What did Jesus do between the crucifixion and the resurrection? In theology, that space between death and new life is known as the harrowing of hell, a mysterious, largely untold chapter of the Christian story. It's here, in this invisible realm, that Gibson seeks to set the stage for the ultimate cosmic confrontation. And make no mistake, this isn't metaphor, it's war. The harrowing of hell, ancient, ominous, holy. The term harrowing of hell refers to the belief that after his crucifixion, Jesus descended into the underworld, not as a victim but as a conqueror. While mainstream Christianity focuses on the cross and the empty tomb, the early church fathers devoted significant attention to what happened in between. The Apostles' Creed even proclaims it. He descended into hell. On the third day, he rose again. The Bible references it briefly. 1 Peter chapter 3, 19-20. He went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. Ephesians chapter 4, 9. He descended to the lower earthly regions. Revelation 1:18. I hold the keys of death and Hades. These verses sparked centuries of interpretation. Catholic and Orthodox traditions embrace the image of Jesus storming hell's gates, defeating Satan, and rescuing the righteous dead. Adam, Eve, Abraham, Moses, the prophets, those who awaited salvation. In Gibson's vision, this descent is not symbolic. It's visual. It's real. It's the spiritual war of the ages. The visionaries who saw it first. To bring this invisible story to life, Gibson draws from powerful mystic sources, especially Anne Catherine Emmerich, the German nun and visionary whose writings inspired the Passion of the Christ. In her account, Jesus enters hell like a divine storm, breaking down ancient gates, confronting saints out of darkness. It's more than redemption, it's retaliation against death, sin, and every force that opposes divine love. Another key inspiration, Mary of Jesus of Agreda, a Spanish mystic whose visions describe Jesus' descent as a sovereign act of mercy and judgment. In her writings, the underworld isn't just fire. It's a shadowed domain of regret, silence, and bound souls waiting for light. Gibson has made it clear he wants to dramatize what these women saw: angels, demons, and the unseen realm. In Christian theology, spiritual warfare is not just poetic, it's literal. Angels and demons are real. Heaven and hell are not abstractions but dimensions that touch human history. Gibson's sequel intends to unveil that unseen world. Expect terrifying, surreal imagery, demonic beasts, cavernous prisons, shadowy realms, and angelic warriors. Expect mythic confrontations where Christ is no longer silent, but speaks with authority and commands the elements of eternity itself. In Emmerich's vision, Jesus isn't just rescuing souls, he's declaring victory. He grasped the hand of Adam and raised him from the grave. Eve wept and fell before him. The patriarchs followed, their faces lit with glory. These aren't just moments, they're reversals of the fall, of the curse, of ancient sorrow, and they offer a cinematic canvas unlike anything faith-based film has ever attempted. A Christ in command. From suffering servant to cosmic king in the Passion, Jesus was the Lamb, beaten, mocked, broken. In resurrection, he is the Lion, roaring in the halls of hell. This transition isn't just dramatic, it's doctrinal. The suffering of Jesus was necessary to atone for sin, but his resurrection was the proof of authority. It was the dawn of a kingdom. Gibson's film intends to show that transformation in visual, theological, and emotional terms. Audiences will witness the moment where Jesus goes from wounded sacrifice to triumphant ruler, a change many Christians know theologically, but have never seen on screen. And that matters, because faith isn't just about what happened, it's about how it transforms us. Seeing Christ declare dominion in hell itself is a bold, controversial, and potentially transformative artistic choice, a theological balancing act. Here lies the danger and the brilliance of Gibson's approach. If resurrection strays too far from Scripture, it risks alienating evangelical viewers. If it leans too much into Catholic mysticism, it could be dismissed as fantasy. And if it takes creative liberties without anchoring in theology, it may face backlash from all sides. But if it threads the needle, if it honors Scripture while dramatizing the unseen, it could become a rare masterpiece. A film that doesn't just tell the resurrection story, but expands it into the realm of the soul. It's a risk worth taking. Because no other filmmaker has dared to ask. What if resurrection wasn't the end of the story? What if it was the beginning of another war? Why It Matters, a story for this generation. In a world that often reduces faith to personal emotion, the Passion of the Christ, resurrection may remind audiences that Christianity began as a revolution, a cosmic upheaval of sin, death, and despair. The descent into hell is not just a narrative device. It's a spiritual declaration. I have overcome the world. John 16:33. Death, where is your sting? 1 Corinthians 15:55. To visualize that, to make it cinematic, is to give the resurrection its rightful weight, not a quiet conclusion, a cosmic coronation. 4. Behind the scenes and production, crafting a spiritual epic. A vision as ambitious as the Passion of the Christ, resurrection cannot exist without an equally monumental process behind it. From scripting to set design, casting to cinematography, every aspect of the production reflects a project that is not just cinematic, but spiritual, historical, and mythic in scale. This is not a sequel created by studio demand or franchise pressure. It's a film born out of deep conviction, years of development, and a director's unrelenting desire to tell the untold. A story, years in the making. The first seeds of resurrection were planted almost immediately after the release of The Passion of the Christ in 2004. Despite the massive financial success, Mel Gibson didn't rush into a follow-up. He waited and wrote and rewrote. In fact, the screenplay, co-written with Randall Wallace, his longtime collaborator on Braveheart, took years to develop. By 2020, the project was on its 5th draft, with Jim Caviezel stating he had already read earlier versions. Wallace, a devout Christian and seasoned storyteller, brought the same emotional depth and epic pacing that helped Braveheart win an Academy Award. Together, he and Gibson envisioned a sequel that would not merely continue a story, but expand a spiritual universe. Caviezel returns. The face of Jesus. Jim Caviezel's return as Jesus Christ was never a guarantee. After the first film, he faced rejection in Hollywood, with many studios unwilling to work with him due to the film's controversies and his outspoken faith. But Caviezel never wavered. He remained emotionally and spiritually tied to the role and to Gibson. In a public interview, Caviezel said, "I had to play him again. The world needs to see this part of the story, the triumph." His commitment goes beyond performance. On the set of the original film, Caviezel endured brutal conditions, being accidentally whipped, dislocating his shoulder, even being struck by lightning. He reportedly used his own blood in one of the crucifixion takes. To reprise that role, knowing what it cost him before, speaks volumes. It's not just acting, it's devotion. Returning cast. A family reunited. The emotional weight of Resurrection is bolstered by the return of several iconic cast members from the original film. Maya Morgenstern returns as Mary, the mother of Jesus, bringing the same dignified sorrow and fierce maternal faith that moved audiences in 2004. Francesco DeVito reprises his role as Peter the Apostle, a man who denied Christ, but became a rock of the early church. The late Christo Zhivkov, who portrayed John the Beloved, was expected to return. Tragically, he passed away in March 2023, following a battle with cancer. His potential final scenes will now carry deep emotional resonance. There is ongoing speculation about whether Monica Bellucci, Mary Magdalene, or Rosalinda Celentano, Satan, will return. Their presence would add a visual and thematic continuity, especially if Gibson chooses to echo the surreal, symbolic imagery of the original. Filming locations. Stepping into the ancient world. Gibson is no stranger to immersive, on-location filmmaking. With Resurrection, he continues that approach, anchoring the story in places that feel ancient, weathered by time and sacred to the eye. Principal photography began in April, with production split between studio and real-world locations. Cinecittà Studios, Rome, a legendary cinematic stage used in films like Ben-Hur, Gangs of New York, and The Name of the Rose. Here, Gibson could construct massive biblical sets with full creative control. Matera, Italy. Known for its ancient stone cityscape, Matera has served as the backdrop for the Passion, No Time to Die, and the Gospel, according to St. Matthew. Its timeless geography makes it a natural stand-in for Jerusalem and the realms beyond. Krakow, Italy. A ghost town filled with decaying medieval architecture. Krakow offers an eerie, otherworldly feel. It's rumored to represent parts of the underworld or spiritual dimensions in the film. Mexico, TBA. Though not yet confirmed in detail, additional scenes are expected to be shot in Mexico. This might offer new landscapes, perhaps desert wilderness, mountainous ascension scenes, or distant visionary realms. This mix of locations gives the film its epic scope. It's not just historical, it's elemental. Sacred ground captured through the lens. Independent production. A passion project, literally. Despite its massive vision, Resurrection is being independently financed and produced. That's significant. No major studio is controlling the narrative. No committee is watering down the vision. Mel Gibson, for all his controversies, is doing this his way, with complete creative authority. This freedom allows him to blend bold theology, stunning visuals, and artistic risks without interference. But it also comes with challenges, budget constraints, distribution hurdles, and marketing limitations. Still, Gibson has done it before, and the financial success of The Passion proved that faith-based audiences will show up in droves if the story connects. Aesthetic vision, from gore to glory. The first film was known for its brutal realism. It shook audiences with its unrelenting physical violence. But Resurrection promises a shift, not away from power, but toward transcendence. Reports suggest the sequel may lean into visual allegory, surreal landscapes, mystical gates, glowing spirits, symbolic imagery, chains breaking, cosmic storms, rivers of light, contrast of realms, earthy, gritty hell versus radiant, heavenly ascension. Creative effects, digital de-aging, slow motion divine moments, immersive soundscapes. In short, if The Passion was grounded in blood and dirt, Resurrection will reach for the stars. The scale of sacrifice. Behind every frame lies not just budget or design, but sacrifice. For Gibson, it's the burden of past scandals, public opinion, and industry doubt. For Caviezel, it's the cost of career marginalization. For the cast and crew, it's the challenge of portraying one of the most sacred events in all of human history, with weight, wonder, and fear of getting it wrong. And yet they've chosen to do it. Because for them, this isn't just a film, it's testimony. A new cinematic language, speaking the divine in sight and sound. In The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson defied convention by stripping away modern comforts, no English dialogue, no pop soundtrack, no familiar cinematic crutches. Instead, he chose the brutal realism of Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew. He gave audiences not just a film, but a foreign immersion into sacred history. It was raw, it was risky, and it worked. For The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, Gibson isn't just revisiting that choice. He's redefining cinematic language once again. But this time, the story isn't rooted in the blood-soaked earth of Golgotha. It rises beyond, into time, eternity, and the spiritual unknown. So how do you film the resurrection? Not just as an event, but as a dimension, sounding like heaven. The power of language. One of the most defining traits of the original film was its commitment to historical authenticity through language. The choice to have actors speak in ancient tongues was more than a gimmick. It grounded the story in the world it came from. It disoriented viewers in a purposeful way, forcing them to watch with reverence, not just entertainment. Early reports suggest Resurrection may once again embrace this technique. Aramaic, likely used in Jesus' interactions with his disciples and those he rescues in the underworld. Hebrew, possibly tied to scriptural references or prophetic declarations. Latin, used sparingly, perhaps in Roman scenes or narrative flashbacks. These linguistic layers won't just communicate, they'll transport. But there's also talk of a new layer, a spiritual language. Wordless, symbolic communication between heavenly beings. Expressions that bypass translation and strike straight at the soul. Whether conveyed through music, visuals, or silence, this layer may allow the film to speak in tongues cinema has never dared attempt. Light as language, from shadow to glory. In The Passion, light was scarce. Darkness cloaked most of the narrative, reflecting both the hour of crucifixion and the despair of the disciples. Resurrection will invert that palette. Expect the resurrection scenes and heavenly visions to explode with light. Not just illumination, but meaningful radiance. Light in biblical literature is never just a backdrop. It's revelation, transformation, and divine presence. Here, Gibson may explore golden halos as spiritual authority, white fire symbolizing holiness, dim gray hellscapes with bursts of divine breakthrough, color shifts to mark movement between dimension, e.g., a blue for time-bending scenes, red for spiritual warfare. Light won't just help tell the story. Light is the story. Visual metaphor, a language of symbols. One of Gibson's greatest strengths is his use of symbolism. In The Passion, we saw it in the haunting image of Satan cradling a demonic baby, or the crushing of a serpent beneath Jesus' foot. In Resurrection, the symbolic potential is boundless. Broken gates representing the collapse of hell's dominion. Chains shattering as souls are released. Lambs rising from graves. Pure souls redeemed. Trees blooming in barren places as a visual resurrection. Rivers of light flowing from Jesus' footsteps. Rather than telling audiences what to think, Gibson will likely show them what to feel through images that linger long after the credits roll. Cinematic structure, non-linear time, non-human space-time in Resurrection may not behave like time at all. Gibson has hinted that the story's structure will bend and fold, reflecting the theological belief that Jesus, as divine, exists outside of time. This gives him permission to flash backward to scenes from Jesus' earthly life, flash forward to moments after his resurrection, cross-cut between realms, earth, hell, heaven. Present parallel storylines that echo each other. This narrative complexity demands trust from the audience, but rewards it with a multi-dimensional perspective on the resurrection. In essence, viewers will experience time as heaven sees it. Sound and silence, sacred contrast. In The Passion, the sound design was visceral. Whips cracked like gunfire, cries echoed like thunder. Silence came like a mercy or a warning. For Resurrection, expect something more spiritual, sonic and surreal. Choral swells when Jesus appears in hell. low rumbles and harmonic resonance during divine encounters, silencing key resurrection scenes where words fail, presence speaks. Composer John Debney, who scored The Passion, may return to create another haunting, emotionally wrenching soundscape. The use of ancient instruments, dissonant tones, and heavenly harmonies could create a musical theology, a soundscape of salvation. The resurrection body, flesh or glory, the resurrected Christ has always puzzled theologians. Was he physical or spiritual, tangible or transcendent? Gibson may explore that mystery through visual contrast. A Jesus who bears the wounds of crucifixion, yet radiates glory. A body that moves through walls but touches the broken. A resurrected form that's both scarred and beautiful, fully human and fully divine. There are even rumors of digital de-aging to show a flawless, glowing Christ, contrasted with the battered Jesus of the first film. But another bold choice would be to show Jesus as he is now, wounded but victorious, weathered by pain yet shining with purpose. Whichever path Gibson chooses, it will speak volumes without words. Set design, building the unseen. How do you depict hell or heaven? Gibson's art teams will face enormous challenges designing spiritual landscapes, crumbling stone gates, smoky caverns, and glowing thresholds. Heavenly realms, celestial gardens, ethereal mountains, shimmering cities. Transitional zones, places where time bends and spirits travel. Expect set design to blend historical realism with fantastical elements, as if Lord of the Rings collided with ancient Judea. The key is not to break belief, but to expand it. Audiences won't just see these places, they'll feel them. Resurrection as revelation. Above all, the passion of the Christ. Resurrection aims to reveal not just what happened, but what it means. Through a blend of ancient language, bold symbolism, rich visual metaphors, and immersive sound, Gibson is building more than a sequel. He's crafting a spiritual experience, a visual liturgy for the screen. He's not just telling a story. He's inviting us into it. 6. Cosmic and controversial elements. Where theology meets myth. To portray resurrection is one thing. To expand it into cosmic warfare is another. Mel Gibson is not merely telling the story of Christ's return from the grave. He's lifting the veil between heaven and hell, time and eternity, body and spirit. The passion of the Christ. Resurrection isn't just about what Jesus did. It's about where he went, what he saw, and what he conquered in realms the human eye cannot perceive. And in doing so, Gibson is entering dangerous territory, both visually and theologically. The descent into hell, darkness as a dimension. In most depictions of Christ's resurrection, the narrative moves from the cross to the tomb, then to the upper room and Mount of Ascension. Rarely do filmmakers dwell on the mysterious in-between, the 3 days when, according to tradition, Jesus descended into the depths of Hades. Gibson is not only dwelling there, he's building an entire world beneath the surface. Here, hell is not just fire and torment. It's symbolic, architectural, spiritual, a domain of death. And it's not just empty, it's occupied by the souls of the Old Covenant faithful, by demonic beings, by a hierarchy of evil awaiting divine disruption. This version of hell, inspired by Catholic mysticism and early Christian writings, is layered and vast. Caverns filled with echoes of regret, thrones of darkness, portals, prisons, and above all, a sense that something holy is about to break in and destroy everything built on fear. The harrowing as visual revolution. The harrowing of hell may become the film's defining moment, both narratively and visually. Imagine Jesus walking through sulfurous shadows as chains snap, demons scream, and light floods ancient corridors where prophets and patriarchs have waited for millennia. In this imagined vision, Jesus is no longer passive or bruised. He is active, radiant, unrelenting, not suffering, but liberating. The film could depict him declaring victory over death before a council of fallen spirits, lifting Adam and Eve from their tombs, fulfilling Genesis, breaking gates and seals, echoing Revelation, silencing Satan not with violence but with divine authority. It's powerful, but it's also controversial because it isn't strictly biblical. It's extra-biblical, drawn from visions, poetry, and apocryphal accounts. And that brings the film to a theological crossroad, embracing the mystical, risk and reward. Gibson is venturing into material that, while long present in Catholic and Orthodox tradition, is unfamiliar or even uncomfortable for many evangelical audiences. Sources like Anne Catherine Emmerich, whose graphic visions influenced the first film; Mary of Agreda, who described heavenly architecture and Christ's cosmic actions; the Gospel of Nicodemus, an apocryphal text detailing Jesus' journey into the underworld. For some viewers, these additions deepen the mystery of resurrection. For others, they're distractions, or worse, theological fiction. This dynamic creates risk. Too mystical, and the film loses scriptural authority. Too imaginative, and it invites theological backlash. Too mythological, and audiences might feel it replaces the gospel with fantasy. But therein lies the power. Resurrection is not playing it safe. It's pressing into imaginative theology, the way Tolkien and Lewis once did, daring to visualize the unseen and asking, what if the spiritual world looked like this, depicting Satan, shadows in the silence? Satan's role in the first film was subtle but unforgettable. A pale, androgynous figure watching Jesus suffer. A symbolic whisperer of doubt and mockery. This time, Satan may return in a more terrifying, concrete form, perhaps as a ruler of the underworld, or as a manifestation of fear itself. Whispers suggest a celestial confrontation between Jesus and Satan. Metaphysical forms, no horns or tails, but something more horrifying. Twisted light, corrupted beauty. A cosmic trial where justice is rendered not with weapons, but with truth. These ideas border on the mythic, but if portrayed wisely, they could illuminate spiritual truth through symbolic vision. Heavenly hosts. Do angels have form? Another daring direction. How to depict angels. In Christian art, angels are either humanoid beings with wings or abstract metaphors: fire, wind, eyes, wheels. Gibson may choose to follow more ancient descriptions from Scripture. Ezekiel's wheels. Ezekiel 1. Flaming swords. Genesis 3. Four-faced creatures around the throne. Revelation 4. Or he may borrow from Jewish mysticism, with angels as cosmic servants of light, barely comprehensible, speaking not in words but waves and echoes. Such depictions would radically shift what viewers expect from heaven. And they'd make Resurrection stand out not only as a faith-based film, but as a piece of visual theology. Ancient technology or divine design. In his more cryptic interviews, Gibson hinted at imagery that some interpreted as bordering on science fiction, a realm beyond, with hints of celestial mechanics and divine design. Could he be toying with ideas of undimensional travel? O sacred energy, a being architectural heaven resembling ancient alien temples or mythic cities? If so, these speculative themes, though risky, could attract younger, sci-fi influenced audiences. Think Marvel's Celestials meets Heavenly Jerusalem, but it would also challenge traditional religious viewers. The key here is intention. Gibson isn't making a Marvel movie. He's exploring the visual language of the divine in all its mystery and magnitude. Fan theories and satirical speculation. Naturally, the internet has exploded with fan theories ranging from the fascinating to the absurd. Jesus flies through galaxies to reach heaven. Hell is a parallel dimension like the Upside Down. The sequel will end with a post-credit scene teasing the ascension. Social media platforms have created parody trailers, fake leaks, and theological memes mocking the idea of a resurrection sequel. And yet, beneath the jokes, there's genuine fascination. Because while many laugh at the idea of a mythic resurrection film, they're still talking about it. They're wondering what Gibson might show and why it matters. That attention is part of the controversy, and the controversy is part of the legacy. The boldness of unseen truth. What Gibson is attempting is not just artistic, it's deeply theological. He is not rewriting the Bible, but he is asking, what does resurrection look like from eternity's perspective? And then answering it through film. In doing so, he touches on something sacred, the mystery of the in-between, the battleground between fear and faith, between despair and deliverance. And that space demands not literalism, but reverent imagination. Because in the end, resurrection doesn't just want to show you Jesus rising. It wants to show you what he defeated to rise. 7. Cultural shifts and market risks. Releasing a resurrection in a divided world. When The Passion of the Christ debuted in 2004, it arrived into a world radically different from the one we live in now. Social media was still in its infancy. Cancel culture hadn't entered the mainstream, and the very idea of a religious epic-breaking box office record seemed impossible until it happened. Today, nearly 2 decades later, the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection is preparing to walk into a new cultural battlefield, one defined by polarization, hypersensitivity, and digital scrutiny. Mel Gibson is not just releasing a film. He's releasing a spiritual statement into a world that has changed, and not always for the better. From reverence to relativism. In 2004, The Passion was embraced by millions who saw it as a deeply reverent depiction of Christ's sacrifice. Churches rented entire theaters. Families wept together. Faith leaders praised it as a tool for evangelism. But today's audiences are more divided and more cynical. In an era when traditional faith is often seen as outdated or even oppressive, Resurrection risks being viewed not as sacred storytelling, but as preaching, especially to secular or skeptical audiences. Moreover, many younger viewers were born after the first film's release. To them, The Passion is not a vivid memory. It's an old title on a list of controversial films. Reaching this generation requires more than familiarity. It demands relevance without compromise. A changed media landscape. The marketing landscape has evolved drastically since 2004. Back then, a studio could promote a film through TV spots, talk shows, and newspaper ads. Now, everything is online, and one misstep can go viral within minutes. Gibson and his team face a delicate balancing act. Too reverent, and the film risks being dismissed as niche, only for Christians. Too fantastical, and it may be mocked by critics or dismissed by theologians. Too bold, and it could be targeted by both religious watchdogs and progressive activists. The internet no longer waits for full context. Clips can be taken out of meaning. Imagery can be misinterpreted. Even a single line of dialogue, ripped from its narrative, can spark outrage before the film ever premieres. Mel Gibson, visionary or liability? Perhaps the greatest wildcard isn't the film itself, but its creator. Mel Gibson remains one of Hollywood's most complicated figures. Once beloved as a leading man and Oscar-winning director, he later became the subject of global controversy following multiple scandals, including recordings of racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic remarks. Though he staged a powerful comeback with Hacksaw Ridge in 2016, earning 6 Academy Award nominations, many in Hollywood still view him as radioactive. For some, Resurrection offers a chance at redemption. For others, it's an unwelcome reminder of past offenses. Critics may ask, can an artist with a flawed public history tell a sacred story? Should personal scandal disqualify spiritual storytelling? And will audiences separate the man from the message? Gibson, for his part, has remained largely silent about his personal past. But his return to directing this sequel will undoubtedly reignite debates about art, accountability, and the power of storytelling to heal or provoke. Market risks in a woke world. In a world increasingly shaped by ideological lines, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection risks offending multiple camps at once. Progressive critics may accuse the film of religious indoctrination or glorifying a patriarchal worldview. Conservative viewers may bristle at any mystical or non-traditional elements pulled from Catholic visions or extra-biblical sources. Secular media may dismiss the film as another relic of an outdated faith movement. Then, religious purists may condemn it for taking too much artistic license with sacred events. It's a no-win situation, unless the film chooses to ignore the noise, which, knowing Gibson's history, it almost certainly will. Faith-based audiences, still hungry, still waiting. Despite the cultural friction, there remains an enormous faith-based audience, particularly in the United States, hungry for content that reflects their beliefs with excellence and emotional power. These audiences were the backbone of the original film's success. They bought tickets in droves. They hosted discussions, invited friends, even led people to Christ after screenings. But they've also grown more discerning. In the years since The Passion, the Christian film genre has expanded, but often with lower budgets and preachy scripts. Audiences now want quality, cinematography, acting, writing that matches Hollywood standards without compromising on truth. If Resurrection delivers on that front, it could trigger a revival of religious cinema, not as moral lesson, but as mythic art, global impact, and religious tensions. The original Passion was a global sensation. In countries like Brazil, Mexico, and the Philippines, it was seen as a deeply holy film. In Europe and the Middle East, it sparked theological discussion and intense backlash. Today, geopolitical tensions and religious sensitivities are more fragile than ever. A film depicting Jesus descending into hell and conquering spiritual evil may be banned or restricted in certain Islamic countries, face censorship in nations with strict anti-blasphemy laws, trigger interfaith criticism from those who feel it disrespects other traditions. Yet for many Christians around the world, especially in persecuted or restricted areas, this film will be a beacon of courage. A cinematic declaration that Christ's victory is not theoretical, it's universal. A post-pandemic audience. One unexpected shift working in the film's favor? The post-pandemic audience mindset. After years of global fear, division, loss, and uncertainty, many people are searching for hope again. Not surface optimism, but deep, meaningful, transcendent hope. A film that dares to visualize Christ defeating death, not just for one man, but for all humanity, may offer something culture no longer knows how to express. That resurrection is not just a doctrine, it's a promise. And that promise, if filmed with beauty and boldness, could resonate far beyond religious circles. A moment of reckoning. In many ways, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection is more than a sequel. It's a test. Can a faith-based film survive in a culture of offense? Can myth, theology, and cinema coexist without collapse? And can Mel Gibson deliver another transcendent experience that stirs both soul and screen? Only time will tell. But if the first film was a shock to the system, this one may be a challenge to the spirit, not because it offends, but because it awakens. Awakens us to beauty, to mystery, to victory. 8. Resurrection as franchise? The birth of a spiritual saga. When The Passion of the Christ was released in 2004, it was never imagined as the start of a series. It was raw, final, devastating. A one-time thunderclap that echoed across theaters and hearts alike. But Resurrection is something else entirely. It's not just the conclusion of that story. It's the continuation of something eternal. And if the signs are true, Mel Gibson and his team aren't treating this as a standalone film. They're building a franchise, not in the way Hollywood usually does, with sequels, spin-offs, and branded merchandise, but in a sacred, serialized form of storytelling that could turn the most profound events in history into a cinematic journey unlike anything we've seen before. Signs of a multi-part vision. One of the earliest hints came from IMDb, where the upcoming film was briefly listed as The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, Part 1. That detail alone sparked rumors that Gibson was planning more than just a 2-hour follow-up. It suggested a saga, a layered, chaptered unfolding of events that go beyond the tomb, beyond Jerusalem, even beyond time. Jim Caviezel, who reprises his role as Jesus, fueled the speculation further in interviews. This is going to be the biggest film in world history, and it's just the beginning. That phrase, just the beginning, is not accidental. Sources close to the production have hinted at least 2 or 3 planned entries, potentially structured like a spiritual epic trilogy. Part 1, the descent into hell, the rescue of the righteous, and the cosmic victory over death. Part 2, the post-resurrection appearances of Christ, the transformation of the disciples, the founding of the early church. Part 3, the ascension, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and the explosive birth of Christianity through Pentecost. Together, this arc would trace the most critical 50 days in Christian theology, from crucifixion to ascension to spiritual empowerment. The trilogy format, why it fits. While some may question the idea of turning sacred events into a trilogy, the structure makes theological sense. The first film, The Passion, captured the depth of Christ's suffering. The second film, Resurrection, is poised to capture his triumph over death and dominion over the spiritual world. The final chapter would capture the handoff of power, from Christ to his church, from presence to mission. In a narrative sense, this mirrors the arc of redemptive history. 1. Sacrifice. 2. Victory. Commission. It's not just good storytelling, it's biblical movement translated into cinematic structure. The risk of expansion. Of course, expanding any story, especially a sacred one, comes with risk. Critics may accuse Gibson of stretching scripture for profit or spectacle. Religious leaders may argue that some episodes, like the descent into hell, are too mystical, while others, like Pentecost, are too denominational, and there's always the fear that sequels will diminish the power of the original. The The crucifixion is the spiritual climax of Christianity. Can anything really follow it? But what Gibson understands, perhaps better than anyone else in faith-based filmmaking, is that resurrection was never meant to be an ending. It was meant to be a beginning, a revolution that spreads, and that revolution deserves to be told. Franchising faith, a new blueprint. If the Passion of the Christ franchise succeeds, it could redefine how Christian stories are told in modern media. No longer isolated, low-budget films about morality or church life, but cinematic mythologies rooted in scripture, with production value and narrative ambition on par with the biggest Hollywood tentpoles. Imagine a future where the Acts of the Apostles is told as a series of global adventures. The life of Paul becomes a character-driven thriller. Revelation is portrayed as a surreal end-times epic. Prophets and patriarchs are woven into interconnected timelines. In short, the Passion series could become the Marvel universe of Christianity, not in style, but in scope and seriousness. And unlike the endless spin-offs of most franchises, this one has an end, the second coming, a final foretold conclusion, which gives it spiritual weight that most film universes can only dream of. Market demand. Can a franchise succeed? Financially, the data is promising. The original film grossed over $600 million worldwide, more than most superhero films at the time. Even after 2 decades, it maintains a loyal fan base. Faith-based streaming services are growing, e.g. The Chosen's success. Faithful audiences are underserved, craving depth and excellence. And younger generations, surprisingly, are more open to spirituality, so long as it's visually arresting and emotionally authentic. A trilogy that combines sacred story with mythic execution could bridge generational gaps and revive interest in biblical literacy through visual engagement. Artistic continuity, one vision across films. Unlike most franchises, which rotate directors and dilute tone over time, this one appears to be guided by one singular vision. Mel Gibson. While controversial, Gibson's commitment to visual symbolism, emotional intensity, and reverent storytelling brings continuity and cohesion that will carry across all chapters. With Randall Wallace still potentially co-writing and Jim Caviezel fully invested in the role, Resurrection and its sequels aren't just passion projects. They are artistic callings, a sacred tapestry stitched with cinema, building a legacy. If successful, the Passion of the Christ franchise could become a legacy-defining work for Gibson and a cultural monument for faith-based storytelling. It would stand not only as a cinematic triumph, but as a reclamation of reverence in film, something often mocked or ignored in modern Hollywood. More than a franchise, it would be a devotional experience, a journey not only through history, but through the heart of the gospel. And for audiences longing for depth, longing for mystery, longing for transcendence, it might just be the story they've been waiting for. 9. Jim Caviezel's journey, the man who became the Christ. In Hollywood, there are actors who play roles, and then there are actors who become them. For Jim Caviezel, portraying Jesus Christ in The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a performance. It was a divine assignment, a calling, a crucible, and it changed everything. Now, nearly 2 decades later, Caviezel is returning to the role that defined and derailed his career. But his journey from actor to icon, from rising star to spiritual lightning rod, is one of the most compelling stories behind the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection. This isn't just about art. It's about faith, sacrifice, and unshakable conviction. The role that ruined and redeemed him. In the early 2000s, Jim Caviezel was on the rise. He'd appeared in The Count of Monte Cristo, Frequency, and Angel Eyes. He had the look, the talent, and the industry buzz to become a leading man. Then Mel Gibson called. The role, Jesus of Nazareth. Caviezel accepted immediately, despite warnings from agents and executives who feared it would end his mainstream career. They weren't wrong. After The Passion shattered box office records, Caviezel wasn't flooded with offers. He was ignored, blacklisted, even mocked. Doors closed. Projects vanished. Casting directors wouldn't touch him. His decision to play Jesus cost him everything, except his soul. "I was no longer one of 5, I was one of 1, he later said. "I don't regret it, not even close. This is who I am." Suffering on set. Art imitates passion. Caviezel's physical suffering during the filming of The Passion has become the stuff of legend. Whipped accidentally during scourging scenes. Dislocated shoulder while carrying the cross. hypothermia from hanging nearly naked in freezing weather, struck by lightning during the Sermon on the Mount, heart surgery required after filming Wrapped. He bore the pain silently. At times he prayed during takes. Other times he cried out in anguish, his real cries ending up in the film's final cut. When Mel Gibson asked if he wanted to stop, Caviezel replied, "No, we're doing it for him." That level of physical and spiritual commitment transcended acting. It became embodiment. He wasn't just portraying Jesus. He was, in a mysterious way, participating in the suffering. After the cross, the years in exile, after the passion, Caviezel's career went quiet. Roles dried up. Offers disappeared. Even Christian studios were hesitant, fearing the weight he brought might overshadow lesser scripts. But Caviezel refused to compromise. He wouldn't take roles that contradicted his values. He turned down projects that dishonored faith. Instead, he focused on quieter, purpose-driven work. Voicing Jesus in the Word of Promise audio Bible. Speaking at churches, universities, and pro-life events. Supporting persecuted Christians and advocating for global religious liberty. He wasn't waiting for Hollywood's redemption. He was walking his own path, a narrow one, but one he believed God had called him to walk. A return to the role, with more fire. Now Caviezel is stepping back into the role of Jesus for resurrection. But this is not the same Jim Caviezel, who first donned the crown of thorns in 2003. This Caviezel is older, wiser, more battle-scarred, and more bold than ever. He's described the script as so powerful it will shake the world. He's compared the resurrection to the ultimate act of love. And he's unafraid to call the film not just a story, but a spiritual weapon in a culture losing touch with God. This film is going to wake people up, not with guilt, but with glory. With the truth of what he did, what he conquered. For Caviezel, this isn't a sequel. It's a recommissioning, a second chance to preach, not with words, but with wounds, bearing the name of Jesus. In interviews, Caviezel has described the loneliness of carrying the role of Christ into real life. Strangers confront him. Christians treat him like a saint. Atheists ridicule him. Every opinion is amplified, but he bears it, because he believes Jesus called him to bear it. He once shared that after the Passion, a man approached him and said, "Your performance changed my life." Caviezel's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do it to entertain. I did it to reveal." To reveal what? The cost, the love, the resurrection, personal sacrifice, eternal focus. Behind the scenes, Caviezel has endured more than career struggles. He and his wife Carrie adopted 3 children from China, each with serious medical conditions. He once said, "The world calls them unwanted. Jesus calls them mine." He has also battled health challenges, faced public scrutiny for his outspoken beliefs, and remained unapologetically Christian in an industry that often prefers ambiguity. But that's the through line of Caviezel's journey. He isn't trying to be famous, he's trying to be faithful. A man transformed. In returning to the role of Jesus, Caviezel is bringing not just his face, but his full journey, his joys, wounds, and convictions. He's not stepping into a part. He's stepping into a calling revisited, and for millions of viewers, his presence alone carries emotional weight. Because they know the cost. They've watched the fallout, and they've seen the perseverance. He didn't play Christ. He suffered with him, and in resurrection, that sacred fire still burns. 10. Final reflection. Faith, film, and legacy. Some films entertain, others inform. But once in a generation, a film comes along that transcends the screen, becoming a movement, a mirror, and a moment of encounter. The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection aspires to be that kind of film. It is not merely the sequel to one of the most controversial and spiritually impactful films in history. It is the next chapter in a sacred story that refuses to be silenced. One that calls its audience to consider not just what happened 2,000 years ago, but what that moment still means now. This final chapter is not about marketing, casting, or cinematic speculation. It's about legacy, the kind only a story rooted in eternity can leave behind. The story that still divides and unites. From the beginning, the story of Jesus Christ has divided history, nations, families, and hearts. So it's no surprise that any film daring to retell his resurrection, especially with imagination and scope, will spark controversy. The Passion did. And Resurrection will too. But the power of this film won't lie in whether critics cheer or scoff. It won't lie in Rotten Tomatoes scores or box office numbers. It will lie in its ability to ask eternal questions. What if the resurrection wasn't just a moment, but a movement? What if Jesus didn't just rise then, but wants to rise in us now? And what if the realm he entered, the realm of death, hell, and spiritual war, is realer than we've dared to admit? This film isn't just revisiting ancient doctrine. It's confronting modern denial, the denial of transcendence, the numbing of mystery, the dulling of awe. Cinema as sacred encounter. Hollywood has shown us everything, from alien invasions to multiverses to artificial intelligence. But Resurrection asks something different. It asks, can a film return us to awe? Can it silence us? Can it stir our souls with more than nostalgia? Can it awaken not just belief but reverence? Gibson, for all his flaws, is one of the few filmmakers unafraid to wield cinema like a liturgical act, a sacrament of light and image. He understands that the screen is not just a tool of entertainment. It can be a sanctuary, if handled with holy fire. The Passion shocked us with suffering. Resurrection may sanctify us through wonder. A new generation, a new invitation. Many who saw The Passion in 2004 are now parents, pastors, or leaders. But there's a whole new generation, disconnected from church, disillusioned with religion, who've never seen Christ portrayed like this. For them, Resurrection is an invitation, not into dogma, but into mystery, not into tradition, but into transcendence. A film that dares to say, he didn't stay dead, and neither should your soul. If done right, Resurrection could speak to those raised on Netflix and TikTok with a voice ancient and eternal. A cinematic gospel that breaks through boredom with blazing glory. The risk of reverence. Of course, the risk remains. We live in a world that's grown increasingly cynical toward religion. Even believers often guard their hearts with suspicion, weary of false promises or political co-opting of faith. Gibson's film walks a razor's edge between art and devotion, between storytelling and theology. But perhaps that's the point. Resurrection was never safe. It was shocking. It didn't tiptoe out of the tomb. It shattered the grave. So why should a film about it play it safe? If Jesus really conquered hell, death, and the powers of darkness, then no portrayal of that event should be timid. It should roar with fire, thunder with beauty, and leave the audience speechless, not from spectacle, but from holy silence. From Encounter, the role of the artist in a spiritual age. In many ways, Resurrection isn't just a story about Jesus. It's a story about art in a spiritual age. We live in a time of endless content. Every day, new shows, reels, and films flood our screens. But few dare to go beyond comfort, irony, or trend. Gibson, flawed, forgiven, fierce, dares to reach higher. To reclaim cinema as a prophetic act. To wield camera and script like ancient scrolls, inviting the world not into distraction, but into destiny. That is legacy. That is art that echoes. That is what Resurrection could become, if this film succeeds. If Resurrection succeeds, not just commercially but spiritually, it may open the floodgates for a new kind of sacred storytelling. Films that treat scripture not as Sunday school lesson, but as epic, immersive mythos. Films that reawaken awe in a generation numb to it. Films that don't merely depict what God did, but reflect what He is still doing. We may see biblical cinema reborn, not as an industry, but as a movement. One rooted not in perfection, but in holy risk. Final words. The tomb is still empty. In the end, this film, like the gospel itself, will not be for everyone. Some will mock it, some will avoid it, some will misunderstand it. But for those with eyes to see, it may become more than a film. It may become a window, a call, a resurrection. Because no matter how dark the world becomes, no matter how broken its stories or weary its viewers, the tomb is still empty, the light is still rising, and the resurrection is not over. It's only just begun. Thank you for journeying through all 10 parts of this reimagined cinematic retelling of the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection. Hey friends, welcome. This isn't just a movie. This is a deep dive review packed with facts and behind the scenes details you won't want to miss. If you're curious about this film, hit that like button now because in today's video, we're breaking down everything. The full story, the cast, both lead and supporting, the director, producer, and cinematographer, pre-production and post-production insights, budget, filming process, and more. We're going behind the scenes to uncover how this movie was made and who brought it to life. So if you truly want to know everything about this film, stay tuned. This video has it all. Resurrection is an upcoming American epic biblical drama, co-produced and directed by Mel Gibson, who co-wrote the screenplay with longtime collaborator Randall Wallace. Starring Jim Caviezel in his iconic return as Jesus Christ, the film serves as a powerful sequel to The Passion of the Christ, this time focusing on the 3 days between Christ's crucifixion and his resurrection, a period shrouded in mystery, awe, and divine power. Also returning are Maya Morgenstern as Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Francesco DeVito as Peter the Apostle, continuing their emotionally charged portrayals from the original film. The Passion of the Christ. Resurrection is set to be released in the United States by untold, Icon Entertainment International, with tentative dates falling between April and June. According to screenwriter Randall Wallace, development of the sequel began years ago. He and Gibson envisioned a bold continuation centered around the resurrection and the events that followed, both earthly and spiritual. Wallace, known for penning Braveheart and directing We Were Soldiers, brings his storytelling prowess back into collaboration with Gibson for this monumental project. By September of that year, Gibson confirmed his intention to direct the sequel, acknowledging that it was a massive undertaking and still a few years away from completion. Then in January, Jim Caviezel entered negotiations with Gibson to reprise his role as Jesus, setting the stage for one of the most anticipated returns in cinematic history. In an interview, Caviezel revealed that the film was already on its 5th draft. Earlier that same year, he had received the 3rd draft from Mel Gibson and was stunned by its power. Caviezel boldly stated that this film will shock audiences and declared his belief that it could become the greatest film the world has ever seen. In January, reports surfaced confirming that production was set to begin in mid-spring, with Caviezel officially returning as Jesus Christ. Actor Christo Jivkov was also expected to reprise his role as John the Disciple, but tragically passed away in March. Principal photography began in April. The film was independently produced and primarily shot at Cinecittà Studios in Rome, as well as on location in the historic city of Matera and the ghost town of Craco, both located in Italy's Basilicata region. Additional scenes are scheduled to be filmed in Mexico, adding a broader visual scope to the project. The Passion of the Christ. Resurrection has officially been confirmed, but this time Mel Gibson's sequel is shaping up to be even more controversial than the original. The first film took the world by storm. It resonated deeply with American evangelicals and found success across global markets where Christians embraced the raw, R-rated biblical epic. Principally inspired by the Gospel of John, The Passion of the Christ also drew from Catholic traditions and the mystical visions of St. Catherine Emmerich. Despite its success, the film stirred intense controversy, including accusations of anti-Semitism, controversies that were only intensified by Gibson's own personal scandals. Even so, Gibson never shied away from discussing the idea of a sequel, one that would pick up where The Passion left off and explore the divine mystery of resurrection. The narrative. The Passion of the Christ remains undeniably one of the most influential biblical epics Hollywood has ever produced. So it comes as no surprise that Mel Gibson is finally working to turn it into a loose franchise, especially in today's cinematic landscape, where franchises often wield more power than individual stars or directors. Still, the question remains: can Gibson deliver another monumental hit that resonates as deeply with evangelical audiences as the first film did? Initially announced under the title The Passion of the Christ 2. Resurrection. Recent updates suggest the project's scale is far greater than expected. As reported by Coming Soon, the film's IMDb listing was quietly updated in early November to The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, Part 1. This subtle change points toward the possibility of a multi-part saga. Actor Jim Caviezel, returning once again as Jesus, confirmed that it might not stop at just one sequel. It could be 2 films, he said, maybe even 3. Production was confirmed to begin in the spring, and by September the script had been finalized. Caviezel made a bold prediction. This will be the biggest film in world history. Mel Gibson continues to collaborate with screenwriter Randall Wallace, the same creative force behind Braveheart. Wallace has long expressed interest in telling the continuation of this story, stating, "The Passion is only the beginning. There's so much more to tell." Within the evangelical community, The Passion of the Christ is considered a cinematic landmark. Some even call it the most powerful faith-based film ever made. Many of them believe that a sequel could surpass even the original in scope, emotion, and impact. And now, the journey continues. Returning cast and visionary storytelling, Jim Caviezel is officially expected to return in his career-defining role as Jesus. The original Passion of the Christ remains one of the most powerful films of his career, despite his work across a wide range of notable projects, including Outlander, The Prisoner, and Person of Interest. Caviezel has continued to immerse himself in the world of biblical storytelling, even portraying the Apostle Luke in Paul, Apostle of Christ, alongside James Faulkner's Paul. He's clearly remained closely involved in the ongoing discussions surrounding the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, speaking openly about the script as far back as several years ago. What's truly remarkable is the number of original cast members returning to continue this epic biblical saga. Alongside Caviezel, Maya Morgenstern is reportedly returning in her iconic role as Mary, the mother of Jesus. Francesco De Vito, known from The Man from UNCLE, is also expected to reprise his role as Peter, one of the most prominent apostles. There are also rumors that Christo Jivkov will return as John, the disciple whose gospel inspired much of the original film. It remains unclear whether Monica Bellucci, Mary Magdalene, or Rosalinda Celentano, Satan, will reprise their roles, though fans are eagerly awaiting confirmation. From a narrative standpoint, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection takes a logical step forward, following the Christian belief that Jesus not only died, but rose from the dead. The original film ended with only a fleeting glimpse of the resurrected Christ. This sequel now seeks to explore what happened in those 3 profound days between his death and resurrection. Interestingly, reports suggest that the resurrection itself will not be the central focus. Instead, the film will delve into the time many Christians believe Jesus descended into hell, an event known in theology as the harrowing of hell. Like the original, the sequel is expected to go beyond the biblical text, incorporating elements from Catholic mysticism and visionary accounts, particularly those of Mary of Jesus of Agreda and Anne Catherine Emmerich. Emmerich's visions, which inspired parts of the first film, describe a cosmic spiritual battle, Jesus tearing down the gates of hell and declaring war on the forces of darkness. If the first film showed Christ's suffering, this one promises to reveal his triumph. Controversy, expectations, and the road ahead. It's important to recognize that much of what the sequel may explore, such as Jesus' descent into hell and the spiritual battle that followed, is only briefly referenced in Scripture. These ideas, often drawn from apocryphal texts and Catholic mysticism, have sparked theological debate among Christians for centuries. If Gibson chooses to focus heavily on the harrowing of hell, he may find it more challenging to unite evangelical audiences around this film, as he did with the first. Still, the long-anticipated production of The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection has already generated a wave of attention online, both serious and satirical. Social media, particularly Twitter, lit up with users poking fun at the idea of a sequel to a religious epic, suggesting a flurry of humorous fake titles. Despite the mixed reactions, there's no denying the cultural impact of the original. When The Passion of the Christ was released, it received a polarizing response. Some hailed it as a deeply spiritual, even holy experience, while others criticized its graphic violence and accused it of perpetuating anti-Semitic tropes. Nevertheless, the film, starring Jim Caviezel as Jesus of Nazareth, became a massive box office success. It grossed over $600 million worldwide, including more than $370 million domestically, making it the highest-grossing R-rated film of all time, a title it still holds today. Now, a recent report claims that filming for the long-awaited sequel could finally begin within the next few months. Caviezel has gone on record calling it the biggest film in world history. and anticipation is building, even if met with skepticism in some circles, is, while fans on social media enjoy speculating and creating parody titles, they may be surprised to learn that the official working title remains The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection. After nearly 2 decades of rumors, rewrites, and delays, it appears that Gibson may finally be ready to step back on set and bring this ambitious vision to life. Although no formal release date has been announced, production is expected to begin soon, possibly by mid-year. That said, only a limited number of outlets have confirmed these details, so the full scope and timeline remain uncertain. Joining Gibson once again is screenwriter Randall Wallace, a longtime collaborator who penned the Oscar-winning screenplay for Braveheart, and also directed We Were Soldiers, which starred Gibson in the lead. Together, they are poised to take audiences deeper into the spiritual journey of Jesus of Nazareth, this time not through suffering, but through ultimate victory. Caviezel's return and the legacy of the Passion. The role of Jesus, which nearly went to Daniel Day-Lewis in the original production, will once again be taken on by Jim Caviezel. His return is both remarkable and courageous, especially considering the trials he endured during the filming of The Passion of the Christ. Caviezel was reportedly struck by lightning, accidentally hit in the head with the cross, and even used his real blood in one of the most intense scenes, all in pursuit of authenticity. His willingness to step back into this physically and spiritually demanding role speaks volumes about his commitment to the story. Several other stars are expected to return as well. Maya Morgenstern will reprise her powerful role as the Virgin Mary. Christo Jivkov is slated to return as John the Apostle, and Francesco De Vito will once again portray Peter. It remains to be seen whether the sequel will follow the same bold stylistic choices as the first film, such as using dialogue entirely in Hebrew, Latin, and Aramaic, the ancient languages spoken during Jesus' time. These elements contributed to the realism and intensity of the original and could return for this follow-up. The working title, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, suggests a focus on the 3 days leading up to and culminating in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. However, whether this long-awaited sequel will ultimately make it to theaters remains uncertain. Still, the latest reports have stirred renewed intrigue online. Caviezel himself continues to fuel excitement, claiming the sequel will be the biggest film in world history. The original film, which portrayed the final hours of Christ's life, became a cultural phenomenon and a box office juggernaut, despite its controversies. Grossing over $600 million globally, The Passion of the Christ remains one of the highest-grossing R-rated films ever made. Upon its release, the film faced harsh criticism for its graphic violence, perceived historical and biblical inaccuracies, and accusations of anti-Semitism. Yet none of that stopped it from connecting powerfully with Christian audiences around the world. Talks of a sequel began as early as 2016, when writer Randall Wallace and Gibson confirmed they were developing a continuation centered on the resurrection. Since then, Caviezel has stayed closely involved, and in a recent interview with Breitbart News, he hinted at more exciting details still to come. And now, after years of silence, the resurrection of this cinematic saga may finally be on the horizon. The waiting game and a changing world discussions around the Passion of the Christ. Resurrection have continued for years, with the latest update arriving in May of this year. Screenwriter Randall Wallace confirmed that development is ongoing. Meanwhile, Jim Caviezel has continued to champion the project publicly, telling Breitbart News that it will be the biggest film in world history. Caviezel also confirmed the working title, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, and revealed that he had read Mel Gibson's third draft of the screenplay. It's clear that Gibson is taking his time, determined to craft a sequel that matches, or even surpasses, the emotional and spiritual depth of the original. Critical reception of the first Passion film was highly polarized. While some critics took issue with its unflinching violence and perceived anti-Semitic overtones, the film was still a major awards contender, earning 3 Academy Award nominations and a box office sensation. It proved that faith-based audiences could drive global success. But more than 20 years have passed since the original shook theaters around the world, and it remains to be seen whether the same level of support will show up again. Caviezel may have full confidence in the script, but the world of today is far different from the one in 2004. On one hand, audiences have grown more desensitized to violence. On the other, tolerance for content considered offensive or insensitive has dramatically declined. In today's cultural climate, the reception to a film as provocative as The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection is impossible to predict. An even larger question looms over its controversial director. Mel Gibson, once celebrated for his filmmaking prowess, has become one of Hollywood's most divisive figures, following years of personal scandals, arrests, and publicized tirades involving racist and anti-Semitic remarks. Yet despite the backlash, Gibson staged a remarkable comeback with Hacksaw Ridge, which earned 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Director and Best Picture. It proved that his vision and talent still command attention, though whether Hollywood is ready to fully embrace him again remains uncertain. Still, the legacy of The Passion of the Christ is undeniable, with Jim Caviezel once again stepping into the role of Jesus of Nazareth, and Mel Gibson once again at the helm. The sequel has the potential to be a cinematic event unlike anything seen before. Whether it soars or stumbles, one thing is certain: The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection will not go unnoticed. Mel Gibson's comeback and a sequel in the spotlight. At the time of its release, The Passion of the Christ was a cultural phenomenon and one of the most talked about religious films ever made. Now, in a recent interview, Jim Caviezel has confirmed that work on the highly ambitious sequel is officially underway. For director Mel Gibson, this project marks a potential return to the cinematic spotlight after years in the shadows. Following public scandals that pushed him out of the mainstream, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection could be the most significant step in his professional resurgence. News of the sequel's development recently made headlines when Gibson himself confirmed the project. Appearing at the Soul Harvest event for an interview with Pastor Greg Laurie, Gibson, who had been mostly silent about the film for years, finally opened up. He revealed the official title, The Resurrection, and shared some of the creative and theological challenges he's faced in bringing the vision to life. Screenwriter Randall Wallace, Gibson's longtime collaborator, also spoke about the film. He emphasized that there's been sustained demand from the evangelical community for a sequel, with many believers convinced it could surpass the original in both spiritual impact and box office success. That's no small ambition. Until the release of Deadpool, The Passion of the Christ held the title of highest-grossing R-rated film in history, earning over $600 million globally on a modest $30 million budget. Currently, The Resurrection has no official studio or financial backers attached. However, with Mel Gibson confirmed as director and Randall Wallace returning to write the script, it's likely that major studios and investors will soon take notice. For years, Gibson remained on the sidelines, mostly taking small acting roles and steering clear of directing. But the buzz surrounding his return is growing, and The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, might just be the project that brings him back to center stage. Anticipation, legacy, and the Empire Strikes Back of Christianity. Mel Gibson's return to directing with Hacksaw Ridge, a gripping war drama starring Andrew Garfield, marked his first directorial effort since Apocalypto. The film was met with critical acclaim, earning multiple Academy Award nominations and securing Gibson's place once again among respected filmmakers. He also returned to action films in Bloodfather, showcasing his enduring on-screen presence. Currently, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection remains in development. Randall Wallace is still refining the script, but the project is very much alive. While an official release date has yet to be announced, and Jim Caviezel's return as Jesus has not been formally confirmed, all signs point to his continued involvement. As Wallace and Gibson shape this next chapter, anticipation continues to grow. Cinema is unique in its power to bring together people from all walks of life, individuals who may not otherwise share the same space or story. When The Passion of the Christ debuted in 2004, it became a global event, grossing over $600 million worldwide. It was the most intense, graphic, and emotionally devastating depiction of the crucifixion ever brought to screen. And for many, it remains the most successful faith-based film in cinematic history. It did what great cinema should do. It moved us, challenged us, and forced us to confront deep spiritual truths. It compelled audiences to wrestle with one of the most iconic and haunting images in human history. A man, tortured and nailed to a cross, crowned with thorns, dying for a purpose greater than himself. Beyond the brutality, the film sparked imagination. It opened doors to explore miracles, divine purpose, loyalty, betrayal, and the ultimate act of forgiveness. And now, with the announcement of a sequel, reactions have ranged from excitement to skepticism, even parody. Years ago, Family Guy mocked the idea of a Passion sequel. Yet here we are, on the cusp of something real, something profound. Jim Caviezel, who has read a recent draft of the script, has boldly called it The Empire Strikes Back of Christianity, a magnum opus, a masterpiece, a film that must be seen to be believed. Though we don't yet know all the details of Gibson's vision for the sequel, one thing is clear. The Passion of the Christ. Resurrection will blend faith and cinematic power in a way that few films ever attempt. This isn't just another movie. It's a return to one of the most impactful stories ever told, reimagined for a new generation. Into the depths, hell, angels, and cosmic mystery. New clues about the Passion of the Christ. Resurrection may lie in the works of Helen Bond, a renowned professor of Christian origins and the New Testament. While Satan only had a brief presence in the first film, it now appears that much of the sequel may take place in hell itself, where Mel Gibson's vision could bring forth a chilling interpretation of eternal suffering. If true, this descent into the underworld may rival the darkest depictions in cinema history. Imagine a harrowing visual experience that puts Clive Barker's Hellraiser or Hellbound to shame. A nightmarish spectacle that horror fans might rush to witness, and that could shake faith-based genre expectations to their core. With such a bold setting, The Resurrection may aim to liberate the narrative from the constraints of traditional Christian storytelling, becoming a true cinematic event, perhaps even one that would impress George Lucas himself. Years after The Passion, Paramount Pictures released Noah, directed by Darren Aronofsky, a film that clearly borrowed tonal cues from Gibson's epic. Though Noah wasn't a direct spin-off, it followed in the footsteps of mythic biblical retellings, blending reverence with creative risk. It featured stone-like angels aiding Noah on his journey, an idea reminiscent of William Shatner's abandoned Star Trek V concept, where Kirk and crew confront a godlike being in one of the franchise's most controversial entries. Depicting angels, demons, and celestial beings poses a unique challenge for filmmakers. On one hand, there's an artistic temptation to visualize the divine. On the other, there's the risk of alienating faith-driven audiences by giving form to what many consider unknowable or sacred. Many filmmakers opt to keep such icons ambiguous, allowing viewers to project their own beliefs onto the screen. But cinema still requires clarity. Symbolism often emerges through natural metaphors, trees, winds, fire, or stone, suggesting the divine without defining it. Whether Gibson will follow this tradition or subvert it remains to be seen. Given his instinct for confronting conventions head-on, we may be in for something more literal, perhaps even divisive. Gibson has previously hinted at some unexpected thematic directions. In one appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, his cryptic comments led some to speculate he might be embracing elements of ancient alien theory or exploring a cosmic dimension to the afterlife. His remarks were vague enough to leave interpretation wide open, allowing both the devout and the speculative to pull up a seat at the table. This openness could pave the way for a sequel that doesn't just retell scripture, but reimagines biblical mythology through a no-holds-barred lens of spiritual warfare, supernatural realms, and cosmic mystery. One thing is certain: the Passion of the Christ. Resurrection will not be content with simply following the footsteps of its predecessor. It seeks to break new ground, emotionally, theologically, and visually, and redefine what a faith-based epic can be. Visions, resurrection, and cosmic possibility. With each new interview, Mel Gibson continues to stoke the fires of speculation, drawing audiences into a realm where theology, mythology, and even science fiction begin to blur. While unlikely, some fans have begun to wonder if Gibson might dare to show audiences a celestial laboratory of God, or even a divine spacecraft. Concepts inspired in part by Marvel's depiction of celestial beings. Powerful, ancient entities with vast lifespans and cosmic authority, who occasionally interact with humanity, much like the Greek gods once did. In his public comments, Gibson has repeatedly stated that the film will not follow a linear narrative. Though the central event is clearly the resurrection of Jesus, the story may unfold in a non-traditional structure, layering timelines, spiritual planes, and theological themes to deliver something more surreal than strictly scriptural. He's hinted that one central event will serve as the film's emotional and thematic anchor, but will be juxtaposed with a series of other moments, visions, and battles. Gibson has carefully avoided revealing the full picture, but the clues all point to an epic spiritual confrontation between Jesus and Satan in the very heart of hell. According to early Christian tradition, often referenced in extra-biblical texts, after Jesus died, he descended into hell not in defeat, but in triumph. His mission, to rescue the righteous souls who had waited in darkness, held captive by sin, and to lead them into the light. This concept, known in theology as the harrowing of hell, is scarcely mentioned in the Bible, but was richly detailed in the visions of mystics like Anne Catherine Emmerich. Her writings depict Jesus moving through the shadows of the underworld, revealing his glory, and liberating the souls of prophets, saints, and the innocent. This is the deeper, mythic foundation. The Passion of the Christ, resurrection may draw from. As for Jesus' resurrection and eventual ascension, fans speculate that Gibson may choose to depict these moments in visually striking ways. The resurrection could show Jesus in a flawless, radiant form, perhaps using digital de-aging to craft an idealized vision of the risen Christ. Alternatively, Gibson might lean into a raw, visceral portrayal, a resurrected Jesus who still bears the marks of his crucifixion, a wounded, weathered man who has triumphed through unimaginable suffering. Such a bold approach would undoubtedly spark intense debate between religious scholars and film critics alike, and Gibson, no stranger to controversy, may welcome that very tension. Even more radically, Gibson may explore speculative imagery in the Ascension itself, celestial realms portrayed through floods of blinding light, surreal soundscapes, and possibly even science fiction aesthetics. There are whispers among fans that he could depict heaven using otherworldly symbols. Majestic white-robed beings, divine ships sailing through the cosmos, or environments that echo Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal more than traditional stained glass depictions. In doing so, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection could become more than just a sequel. It could be a theological odyssey, a genre-defying epic that blends biblical tradition with mythic imagination and challenges audiences to consider the boundaries between faith, fear, and the infinite unknown. Controversy, expectations, and the risks ahead. In some speculative circles, comparisons have even been made to mystical sci-fi stories, where spiritual beings and technology converge, like the merging of the SKS and mystics into glowing, godlike creatures known as Eeks. A visual and imaginative depiction of God's physical form or divine technology would surely thrill genre fans, but it risks alienating the film's faith-based core audience. At this point, it's unclear how Mel Gibson plans to bring these celestial realms to life. But whatever direction he chooses, it's almost certain the film will stir headlines and conversation. Given the massive box office success of The Passion of the Christ, there's no doubt that a sequel could become equally, if not more, profitable. The hype surrounding Top Gun: Maverick, which enjoyed enormous multi-weekend success, has led some analysts to compare its long-tail box office trajectory to that of The Passion. A similarly long-awaited sequel like The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection could capture audiences in the same way. Jim Caviezel has previously spoken about how the first film may have negatively impacted his career, especially in Hollywood. Yet despite that, he remains fully committed to returning as Jesus. In recent years, Caviezel has also drawn criticism for his alignment with conspiracy theories. But such controversy may not deter Mel Gibson, who is no stranger to polarizing headlines himself. With anticipation at an all-time high, many fans have taken to YouTube in search of the film's trailer. A word of caution: none of the trailers currently circulating are official. Most are fan-made concept trailers, creatively edited using footage from the original film or similar productions to speculate on what the sequel might look like. Still, the buzz is undeniable. Given Gibson's history, it's no surprise that The Passion of the Christ 2 is already surrounded by speculation, skepticism, and controversy. The original film, starring Jim Caviezel as Jesus of Nazareth, drew international attention. Critics and audiences alike were split, some hailing it as one of the most powerful biblical depictions ever created, others condemning it as offensive and unnecessarily brutal. And yet, it broke records. The Passion of the Christ remains the highest-grossing rated film in U.S. domestic box office history. There's no denying the sequel's potential, not just as a film for Christians, but possibly as an educational or thought-provoking piece for people of all religious backgrounds. That potential, however, comes with risk. While many embraced the first film's raw depiction of Christ's suffering, others felt that Gibson prioritized shock value over theology. The relentless violence, some argued, overshadowed opportunities to explore the historical and spiritual legacy of Jesus in a meaningful way. Even in its quieter moments, critics claimed the film struggled to illuminate the teachings or the deeper purpose of Christ's life. And so as we await the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, we stand at a crossroads of curiosity, hope, fear, and faith. The sequel could be a cinematic masterpiece, or a firestorm of renewed controversy. But one thing is certain, Mel Gibson's return to this sacred and powerful story will not go unnoticed. Biblical accuracy and the roots of controversy. One of the most enduring criticisms surrounding the Passion of the Christ, and one that continues to fuel controversy around its sequel, is its relationship to biblical accuracy. While the original film marketed itself as a faithful retelling of the final hours of Jesus Christ's life, many theologians and historians have since pointed out numerous inaccuracies, both historical and scriptural. Perhaps the most significant issue is not tied to a single scene, but to the film's overarching portrayal of Jesus. The Gospels describe Christ as the embodiment of love, mercy, and divine hope, a figure of radiant compassion who preached forgiveness and redemption even in the face of cruelty. But the Passion of the Christ chose to focus almost exclusively on suffering. Instead of emphasizing Christ's role as a beacon of salvation, the film presents a nearly unrelenting portrayal of agony, despair, and violence. One of the film's most infamous scenes occurs in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is approached by a shadowy, androgynous figure in a dark cloak, the symbolic embodiment of Satan. A massive serpent slithers toward Jesus, and in a moment of quiet defiance, he crushes it underfoot. While visually powerful, this scene has no scriptural basis. It's a cinematic reference to Genesis 3:15, interpreted loosely and placed in a context never suggested in the Gospels. Then there's the deeply unsettling image of Satan carrying a deformed, chalk-white demonic baby, smirking at Jesus during his torture. This disturbing and surreal image appears nowhere in biblical texts. It was added purely for symbolic effect, likely intended to represent a perverse mockery of motherhood, or a twisted inversion of Mary and the Christ child. Yet its inclusion was one of the many moments that critics claimed veered too far into horror over theology. Even the depiction of the crucifixion itself has been criticized for inaccuracy. The film shows Jesus carrying the full weight of the cross alone, yet some historians argue that Roman custom likely involved carrying only the crossbeam. Similarly, the method of crucifixion, nailing through the hands, has been debated, with many experts believing victims were often tied, not nailed. The level of violence shown in the film is also not found in the Gospels. Nowhere is it written that Jesus was tortured in such an excessively brutal fashion. While flogging is mentioned, the extent of the torment in the film was expanded dramatically for emotional and cinematic effect. Even Jesus' physical appearance in the film has come under scrutiny. Jim Caviezel, who portrayed him, has a Western European look, light skin, long hair, and styled beard. However, historical and cultural context suggests that Jesus, a Middle Eastern Jew from the region of Galilee, likely had darker skin, shorter curly hair, and a less stylized appearance. The now iconic image of Jesus wearing a modest loincloth throughout the crucifixion scenes may also be a sanitized invention. Roman executions were often meant to be fully humiliating, and the victim was typically stripped entirely. All of these details, though perhaps dismissed by some as artistic license, have contributed to an ongoing debate about the purpose and responsibility of religious filmmaking. Is the goal to inspire, to educate, to provoke, or is it to create emotional spectacle regardless of theological truth? As the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection looms on the horizon. It inherits all the controversy of its predecessor, and then some. Whether Mel Gibson chooses to repeat his past approach or pivot to something more grounded in Scripture remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the conversation around biblical authenticity, cinematic storytelling, and spiritual responsibility is far from over. Historical inaccuracy and the shadows of anti-Semitism. The film's portrayal of Jesus as fluent in Latin is one of many creative liberties taken for dramatic effect. In reality, it is unlikely Jesus would have spoken more than a few words of Latin. As a Galilean Jew, he likely spoke Aramaic, possibly some Hebrew, and perhaps a touch of Greek due to trade and regional interactions. Another glaring inaccuracy appears in a scene where Jesus is shown inventing the modern dining table, a moment entirely fabricated for the film. There is no historical or biblical record of such an invention, making it one of the clearest examples of Hollywood embellishment inserted for sentiment or symbolic effect. However, by far the most serious and enduring controversy surrounding the Passion of the Christ, and now anticipated with its sequel, is its alleged anti-Semitic undertones. Given Mel Gibson's well-documented history of making derogatory remarks toward Jewish people, many critics and religious leaders found the film's tone unsurprising. What made it more troubling was the subtle but unmistakable way the film cast the Jewish people in the role of villains. Perhaps the deepest irony in this controversy is the fact that Jesus himself was Jewish, born Jewish, raised Jewish, and crucified as a Jew. Yet this truth is completely absent from the film. Instead, the narrative paints a stark picture of the Jewish crowd as a bloodthirsty mob, angry, cruel, and singularly focused on ensuring Jesus suffers as much as possible. This portrayal is not only historically inaccurate, it's dangerously misleading. The Gospels clearly present a more complex picture: a Roman-controlled Judea, a politically fragile temple hierarchy, and divisions among the people themselves. But the Passion of the Christ simplifies the conflict into a binary struggle between Jesus and a vengeful Jewish leadership, ultimately reinforcing damaging stereotypes that have plagued Jewish-Christian relations for centuries. In response, both Jewish and Christian communities came forward to condemn the film's one-dimensional and incendiary portrayal. The backlash was so intense that Gibson struggled to secure distribution and faced waves of criticism from religious leaders, scholars, and even political figures. One of the most controversial moments in the film's release came from reports that Pope John Paul II had endorsed it. Multiple media outlets claimed the Pope, after viewing a private screening, declared, "It is as it was," seemingly validating the film's historical accuracy. This alleged endorsement sparked a global firestorm. Critics, religious groups, and academics were outraged that the leader of the Catholic Church might support a film many felt was not only historically flawed, but dangerously divisive. In response, the Vatican issued an official statement in January to clarify the situation. It said that while the Holy Father did view the film, it is the Holy Father's custom not to express public judgments on artistic works, judgments which are always open to diverse evaluations of an aesthetic nature. And the ambiguity only fueled more confusion. The Vatican neither confirmed nor denied the Pope's alleged endorsement, leaving the world to debate what he truly thought of the film and its message. What's clear, however, is that The Passion of the Christ remains one of the most controversial religious films ever made, not simply because of its graphic violence or cinematic choices, but because of how it chose to portray truth, faith, and history. As Mel Gibson prepares to bring the Passion of the Christ, resurrection to life, these unresolved debates continue to echo, and they will almost certainly shape how the sequel is received, interpreted, and remembered. Violence, controversy, and a legacy continued. The Passion of the Christ was as unforgettable as it was polarizing, largely because of its unrelenting violence. Much of the film centered on the brutal physical torment Jesus endured, being whipped, stabbed, beaten, and ultimately crucified. For many, it crossed the line from realism into exploitation. Critics argued that the film's intensity was excessive, that the story could have been just as powerful, if not more so, without the graphic brutality. Audience members reported intense emotional and physical reactions, crying, fainting, and in one tragic instance, a woman reportedly suffered a fatal heart attack during the crucifixion scene. Renowned film critic Roger Ebert called it the most violent film I have ever seen. If Mel Gibson's goal was to provoke discussion and stir controversy, he unquestionably succeeded. The Passion of the Christ became one of the most talked about films in modern cinematic history. Not just for its religious themes, but for the firestorm it ignited across cultural, religious, and political lines. Now, more than 2 decades later, a sequel is finally on the horizon, one that promises to go even further. After years of speculation and development, it has been officially confirmed. The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection is in production. This sequel will focus on the 3 days between Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, including his descent into hell, a journey that ventures far beyond traditional biblical storytelling and into bold speculative territory. Jim Caviezel returns as Jesus in what's expected to be an even more intense and provocative portrayal. The film also originally included actor Christo Jivkov, reprising his role as John the Apostle, before his untimely passing in March following a battle with cancer. Principal photography began in April. The production has remained independent and was filmed in multiple historic locations, at Cinecittà Studios in Rome, and on location in the ancient city of Matera and the ghost town of Craco, both in Italy's Basilicata region. Additional scenes will be shot in Mexico, expanding the film's global backdrop. While The Passion of the Christ was undeniably controversial, it was also massively successful, especially among American evangelicals and international Christian audiences, who embraced the film despite its R rating and intensity. Its influence was far-reaching, with over $600 million earned worldwide, making it one of the highest-grossing religious films of all time. The original film drew heavily from the Gospel of John, but also incorporated Catholic traditions and the mystical visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich. This blend of scripture, spiritual imagination, and Gibson's intense direction fueled both praise and protest. The film's release stirred accusations of anti-Semitism, criticism only compounded by Mel Gibson's personal controversies. Still, the movie's impact was undeniable, and its legacy, both admired and reviled, cemented its place in cinematic history. With Resurrection, Gibson appears ready to build on that legacy, turning The Passion into something of a loose franchise. In a world dominated by cinematic universes and sequels, it's no surprise that The Passion of the Christ 2 is finally becoming a reality. But this is not just another sequel. It is a return to one of the most sacred, controversial, and powerfully told stories ever put to film. And if early reports are any indication, this chapter may be even more ambitious and divisive than the last. Expanding the vision, cast returns, sequel scope, and theological depth. In today's cinema landscape, franchises often have more staying power than even the biggest stars or directors. So it's no surprise that Mel Gibson has returned to one of his most iconic and controversial projects, aiming to transform The Passion of the Christ into a multi-film saga. But the question remains, can Gibson strike gold again and recapture the same evangelical audience that turned the original film into a global phenomenon? Originally announced under the official title The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, the latest news suggests an even more ambitious plan, according to Coming Soon. The film's IMDb page was recently updated to The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, Part 1, indicating that the project may evolve into a multi-part series. Actor Jim Caviezel, who returns as Jesus, has confirmed this possibility, stating that the story could unfold over 2 or even 3 films. He also revealed that filming was set to begin in the spring, with the script completed as of September. Caviezel didn't hold back, boldly claiming it would be the biggest film in world history. Once again, Gibson is teaming up with screenwriter Randall Wallace, the Oscar-winning writer behind Braveheart. Wallace, who has long been interested in telling the story of the resurrection, said, "The Passion is just the beginning. There's a lot more story to tell." For many in the evangelical community, The Passion of the Christ is considered the most impactful faith-based film ever made. Wallace revealed that audiences have been urging the creative team for years to continue the story, many believing a sequel could surpass the original in spiritual power and cultural influence. One of the biggest confirmations for fans is Jim Caviezel's return as Jesus. The original film was a career-defining role for him. Since then, he has starred in a wide range of film and television projects, including Outlander, The Prisoner, and Person of Interest. He also returned to biblical drama in Paul, Apostle of Christ, where he portrayed Luke alongside James Faulkner's Paul. Caviezel has remained closely connected to the development of Resurrection, speaking publicly about the script and the vision for the sequel for years. A surprising number of original cast members are also returning. Maya Morgenstern is reportedly set to reprise her role as Mary, the mother of Jesus. Francesco DeVito, known for The Man from UN Sailor, will return as Peter the Apostle, and Christo Jivkov was expected to return as John, the disciple whose gospel inspired much of the first film. Before his tragic death in March from cancer, it remains unknown whether Monica Bellucci, Mary Magdalene, or Rosalinda Celentano, Satan, will return, but their involvement remains a topic of speculation among fans. The focus of The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection appears to be a natural progression from the original. While The Passion ended with a brief glimpse of the resurrected Jesus, the sequel will reportedly delve into the mysterious and powerful 3-day period between his death and resurrection. Many Christian traditions hold that Jesus descended into hell during these days, a belief known as the harrowing of hell. Though this event is only lightly referenced in Scripture, it has deep roots in early Christian theology and Catholic mysticism. Once again, the film may take creative liberties, much like the original, drawing from the visions of Catholic mystics such as Mary of Jesus of Agreda and Anne Catherine Emmerich. Emmerich's visions played a major role in the first film's tone and imagery. And in her writings, she describes Jesus descending into hell, tearing down its gates, and proclaiming victory over Satan and his kingdom. These events are only hinted at in the Bible, and their inclusion in the sequel is sure to stir both theological debate and dramatic speculation. As the project grows in scale, it's clear that the Passion of the Christ, resurrection won't merely retell biblical events. It will attempt to illuminate the unseen, the spiritual, and the cosmic dimensions of the greatest story ever told. Skepticism, speculation, and the sequel that refuses to die. If Mel Gibson chooses to focus heavily on the harrowing of hell, he may face a greater challenge uniting evangelical audiences this time around. While some will embrace the bold, spiritual symbolism, others may struggle with the film's mystical leanings and extra-biblical content. Still, the sheer possibility of The Passion of the Christ 2 entering production has reignited conversation across the internet. Predictably, social media platforms like Twitter have exploded with jokes, mock trailers, and a wave of fake sequel titles. Users flooded timelines with satirical suggestions, poking fun at the idea of a religious epic getting a blockbuster-style follow-up. Yet behind the humor is real anticipation. Originally released to a deeply divided audience, The Passion of the Christ was called by some a profound religious experience, and by others, an exploitative, ultra-violent spectacle. Accusations of anti-Semitism added fuel to the fire. Still, the film, which starred Jim Caviezel as Jesus of Nazareth, became a massive box office success, grossing over $600 million worldwide, including more than $370 million in the US alone. It remains the highest-grossing R-rated film of all time in the domestic market. A recent report claims that shooting for the sequel, which Caviezel himself has called the biggest film in world history, is expected to begin in the coming months. This has energized longtime fans and irritated skeptics. While speculation runs wild, it's worth noting that only a handful of reputable sources have confirmed these production details, so the validity of the timeline remains somewhat unclear. The official working title, The Passion of the Christ Resurrection, has been in place for some time. After years of script revisions and delays, it appears that Gibson may finally be ready to return to set for this long-awaited sequel. So far, no official theatrical release date has been announced, but behind the scenes, momentum is building. Joining Gibson on the creative team is screenwriter Randall Wallace, his trusted collaborator. Wallace famously wrote the Oscar-winning screenplay for Braveheart and later directed We Were Soldiers, which also starred Gibson. Their partnership is known for crafting intense, emotional, and historically rich stories, making Wallace the ideal co-writer for this ambitious spiritual epic. Once again, Jim Caviezel will step into the role of Jesus, a role that almost went to Daniel Day-Lewis in the original film. Caviezel's return is not only impressive, it's remarkable considering what he endured during the filming of The Passion of the Christ. He was reportedly struck by lightning, injured by the cross during scenes, and even used real blood in one of the takes, further cementing his commitment to the role. Other stars expected to return include Maya Morgenstern as the Virgin Mary, Christo Jivkov as John the Apostle, and Francesco De Vito as Peter. Tragically, Jivkov passed away in March after a battle with cancer, making his appearance in the film even more meaningful if completed before his death. It remains to be seen whether other key cast members like Monica Bellucci, Mary Magdalene, or Rosalinda Celentano, Satan, will reprise their roles. One thing, however, is certain. After years of mystery, speculation, and false starts, The Passion of the Christ, resurrection is inching closer to reality. And if Gibson delivers on the scope he promises, we may be about to witness the most daring and divisive biblical film of the modern era. Language, legacy, and the unfolding vision. One lingering question is whether The Passion of the Christ, resurrection will follow the same path of authenticity as the original film, specifically in its use of language. The first movie was praised for its commitment to realism, featuring dialogue entirely in Aramaic, Latin, and Lapans, and Hebrew, the languages believed to have been spoken during Jesus' time. If the sequel continues this linguistic choice, it would signal Gibson's intent to preserve the historical and cultural atmosphere of the period, lending the film an almost documentary-like weight despite its mystical themes. The working title, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, leaves little doubt as to the film's central focus, the 3 days between Christ's crucifixion and his resurrection. This period, mysterious and sacred, is a cornerstone of Christian theology, yet remains relatively unexplored in mainstream film. Whether or not this long-anticipated sequel will ever reach theaters remains to be seen. However, recent reports have stirred renewed intrigue online. The buzz intensified when Jim Caviezel, who returns as Jesus, told Breitbart News that the sequel would be the biggest film in world history. He also confirmed that he had read Mel Gibson's third draft of the screenplay, another indication that real momentum is building behind the scenes. Caviezel originally portrayed Jesus in the 2004 film, which focused on the crucifixion and final hours of Christ's life. Despite facing intense backlash for its graphic violence, perceived historical inaccuracies, and allegations of anti-Semitism, the film became a cultural phenomenon. It earned over $600 million worldwide, securing its place as one of the highest-grossing R-rated films of all time. The Passion of the Christ was divisive. While some critics condemned its relentless brutality and theological liberties, others found it emotionally stirring and spiritually powerful. The film earned 3 Academy Award nominations, including Best Cinematography, Best Original Score, and Best Makeup. Rumors of a sequel began to surface not long after the original's release. Screenwriter Randall Wallace, who previously collaborated with Gibson on Braveheart, confirmed that discussions had started, with a focus on the resurrection and the aftermath of the crucifixion. In May of this year, Wallace gave an encouraging update. Talks were ongoing, and the story was taking shape. Now, with Caviezel speaking openly and production reportedly moving forward, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection appears closer than ever. Gibson, known for his ambition and detail-oriented directing, has commented on the scope and scale he envisions for the sequel. If he delivers on that vision, this could become not just a continuation of a powerful film, but a redefining moment in religious cinema, a changing world, a controversial director, and the sequel's uncertain future. The original Passion of the Christ received 3 Academy Award nominations and raked in record-breaking box office returns, proving that the film had an enormous, devoted audience. But whether that same audience will show up again, more than 2 decades later, remains uncertain. Jim Caviezel has spoken passionately about the sequel's potential, calling it the biggest film in world history. Yet the world in which this film will be released is not the same as it was in 2004. In today's media climate, while audiences may have grown more tolerant of intense violence and disturbing visuals, they've also become less forgiving of content perceived as offensive, insensitive, or divisive. The cultural conversation has shifted, and the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, already steeped in controversy, may find itself at the center of a new wave of scrutiny. Even more unpredictable is the reception of its director, Mel Gibson, a figure as talented as he is controversial. Once one of Hollywood's most powerful storytellers, Gibson's career was derailed by multiple scandals, including widely publicized accusations of racism and anti-Semitism. While his 2016 film Hacksaw Ridge marked a temporary comeback, earning 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Director and Best Picture, many in the industry remain cautious about welcoming him fully back into the spotlight. Still, Gibson has never stopped creating, and now with The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, he is preparing to return to the story that reshaped his career and sparked a global conversation. Jim Caviezel once again steps into the role of Jesus of Nazareth. The original film made history as the highest-grossing R-rated movie of its time, and for Caviezel, it became a defining performance. In a recent interview, he confirmed that development on the sequel is active and ongoing, and that the project is more ambitious than anything he or Gibson have ever attempted. The sequel's official title, The Resurrection, was publicly revealed by Gibson during a rare appearance at the Soul Harvest event, where he sat down with Pastor Greg Laurie for an interview. For the first time in years, Gibson spoke openly about the sequel. its development, its challenges, and the pressure to live up to the original. Randall Wallace, the Oscar-winning screenwriter behind Braveheart, has also returned to co-write the script. He acknowledged that the evangelical community has been calling for a sequel for quite some time, many believing it could surpass the original in both reach and impact. They keep telling us, Wallace said, that there's more story to tell and that it's time. That is no small task. The Passion of the Christ remained the highest-grossing R-rated film in history until Deadpool took the crown in 2016, grossing over $780 million on a fraction of the budget. For a sequel to match that kind of commercial success, it would require not only a captivating narrative, but also a delicate balance between spiritual reverence and cultural awareness. At this stage, The Resurrection has no official studio backing or financial partners, but with Mel Gibson attached to direct and Wallace penning the script, it seems only a matter of time before production finds the support it needs. What remains to be seen is whether Gibson can navigate the expectations, sensitivities, and controversies of today's world, and still deliver a film as bold, powerful, and globally resonant as the first. But make no mistake, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection is no longer just a rumor, it's coming. Cinema, redemption, and the gospel according to Gibson. Mel Gibson has spent much of the last decade on the sidelines, largely taking supporting roles in smaller films and steering clear of the director's chair. But a shift began with Hacksaw Ridge, a gritty World War II epic starring Andrew Garfield. The film marked Gibson's first directorial effort since Apocalypto and was met with widespread critical acclaim, earning 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director. He also returned to his action roots in Bloodfather, a smaller but well-received film that reminded audiences of his presence and skill, earning a solid approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, with The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection in early development, there's cautious optimism that Gibson may be preparing his true cinematic comeback. Screenwriter Randall Wallace is reportedly still refining the script, but all signs point to one certainty: the sequel is happening. There's no official release date yet, nor has Caviezel's return been formally confirmed. Still, all sources, including Caviezel himself, indicate that he is all but certain to reprise his role as Jesus of Nazareth. Cinema has a unique power. It unites people across divides, cultural, political, and spiritual. And when The Passion of the Christ debuted in 2004, it did exactly that. It became a global sensation, earning over $600 million worldwide, and was hailed as the most visceral, powerful, and brutal depiction of the crucifixion ever committed to film. For many, it remains the most successful faith-based film of all time, because it did what truly great cinema should. It moved people. It made audiences think, grieve, reflect, and wrestle with one of the most iconic images in all of human history: a tortured man nailed to a wooden cross crowned with thorns. But the film also sparked the imagination. It pointed toward miracles and mysteries, toward celestial realms of good and evil, and toward the enduring themes of loyalty, betrayal, and forgiveness, love through suffering, hope through agony. And now, the announcement of a sequel has stirred feelings across the emotional spectrum: excitement, curiosity, skepticism, even shame. The world is watching. Choose your reaction. The idea of a sequel was once the subject of parody. Even Family Guy joked about the absurdity of following up a film as final as The Crucifixion. Yet here we are. According to Jim Caviezel, who has read the most recent script, we're in for Mel Gibson's magnum opus, a film he boldly calls The Empire Strikes Back of Christianity. A spiritual and cinematic masterpiece, he claims, that must be seen to be believed. While the exact nature of Gibson's plans remains under wraps, one thing is certain: the sequel will not be a conventional retelling. Faith and fantasy are poised to merge once again. There may be further clues in the work of Dr. Helen Bond, a respected scholar of Christian origins in the New Testament. Her writings, alongside the Gospels and Catholic visionary accounts, may help shape the mythic framework of the sequel. In Gibson's world, biblical truth becomes cinematic legend, and ancient faith collides with imagination. And soon, audiences will step once more into a story not just of death and resurrection, but of cosmic battle, eternal love, and spiritual triumph. Cosmic visions, celestial beings, and Gibson's mythological ambitions. Dr. Helen Bond, a celebrated professor of Christian origins and the New Testament, may have provided some key theological groundwork for the upcoming sequel. While Satan made only a brief appearance in the original film, early rumors suggest that the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection may spend significant time in hell, offering Mel Gibson's vision of eternal suffering, spiritual warfare, and the cosmic battle between good and evil. If true, this descent into the underworld could make Hellraiser 2, Hellbound, look tame by comparison. Horror fans may find themselves unexpectedly drawn to this nightmare-fueled biblical epic, one that could shake off the sanitized shackles of the traditional faith-based genre and deliver a true cinematic spectacle, perhaps even one that gives George Lucas a run for his money. Years after The Passion, Paramount's Noah, directed by Darren Aronofsky, took clear tonal cues from Gibson's work. While not a direct sequel or spin-off, it leaned into mythic interpretation, even going so far as to depict angels as towering, sentient stone creatures aiding Noah on his journey. This idea, strikingly similar to William Shatner's scrapped concept for Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, where Kirk and crew confront a godlike entity, reflects a growing cinematic trend, giving form to the formless, substance to the sacred, and yet, portraying divine figures presents an artistic challenge. On one hand, there's a temptation to create a specific aesthetic for angels, demons, and even God himself. On the other hand, filmmakers risk backlash from faith-based audiences for rendering sacred, unknowable beings too literally. As a result, many films choose to keep divine figures vague, allowing individual spirituality to fill in the blanks. Still, cinema requires visual language. Often, nature becomes metaphor. Celestial beings may appear as living trees, rocks, winds, or flame, archetypes shared across many mythologies. So, will Resurrection tread carefully or boldly redefine biblical iconography? Considering Gibson's well-known resistance to conventional wisdom, audiences may be in for something more specific and more divisive. Gibson has dropped cryptic clues during interviews, some of which have been interpreted as leaning toward ancient alien theory. During an appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Gibson referenced another realm that may or may not be confined to the hell we imagine. His language was vague, deliberately so, leaving space for cosmic purists, theological scholars, and sci-fi dreamers alike to speculate. Could Gibson show us God's spaceship or a divine laboratory? While this seems unlikely, comparisons have been made to Marvel's portrayal of Celestials, powerful godlike beings who live far beyond Earth's time and space, yet occasionally interact with humanity. Much like Zeus in Greek mythology, these beings blur the line between deity and alien, between myth and miracle. Throughout several interviews, Gibson has emphasized that the story will not be linear. Though centered on Jesus' resurrection, the film will likely depart from the traditional biblical timeline. He's hinted that there is a central main event, but it will be juxtaposed with other spiritual dimensions and visionary experiences. In other words, this won't just be a film about a man rising from the dead. It will be about what that resurrection means across realms, time, and belief systems. Gibson continues to tease, offering hints and symbols, but never the full picture. And that may be the point. Like the scriptures themselves, the Passion of the Christ, resurrection is being crafted as a mystery, a revelation meant to be experienced, not explained. Resurrection, ascension, and the return of a king. So far, one thing is clear. The Passion of the Christ, resurrection will place significant focus on Jesus' descent into hell, his confrontation with Satan, and the liberation of souls trapped in darkness. According to early Christian belief, after his crucifixion, Jesus descended into hell to rescue the souls of the righteous. Those who had died before salvation had been fulfilled. Though the Bible mentions this event only in passing, the idea has long fascinated theologians and artists alike. The primary inspiration for this storyline may be drawn from the mystical visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich, a Catholic visionary whose writings heavily influenced the first film. In her accounts, Jesus enters the depths of hell, tears down its gates, and begins gathering the lost, leading them out of bondage and into the blessed company of saints and prophets. This profound act of divine victory, spiritual warfare on a cosmic level, could make for one of the most visually and emotionally stunning moments in modern religious cinema. And yet, even more mystery surrounds how the film will depict Jesus' resurrection and ascension into heaven. The title itself promises a focus on the resurrection, but many believe the final chapter will include his glorious return to the Father. Will Gibson portray Jesus in a perfect, radiant form, using modern de-aging technology to capture the idealized post-resurrection image of Christ? Or will he embrace Jim Caviezel's current, more rugged appearance, a weathered Jesus, still bearing the scars and wounds of death? The latter would be controversial, and yet powerfully symbolic. A resurrected Christ who wears his suffering visibly would ignite powerful conversations among theologians, historians, and even horror film enthusiasts. And Gibson, no stranger to controversy, may welcome that very debate. If he chooses to lean into science fiction, as some have speculated, the ascension scene could take on even grander, more surreal dimensions. Imagine celestial beings in majestic white robes, heavenly realms bathed in light, or even mythic spaceships acting as divine vehicles, evoking imagery reminiscent of Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal, where mystical beings and technology blend into shimmering godlike forms. Some fans have even drawn comparisons to Marvel's Celestials, immortal alien beings that blend ancient myth and modern cosmic lore. In this context, Gibson's ascension scene could blur the lines between traditional faith and speculative fantasy, either enchanting or alienating audiences depending on their expectations. However Gibson brings it to life, one thing is certain: the Passion of the Christ. Resurrection will not be a quiet, understated sequel. It will be bold, imaginative, and deeply provocative. Given the original film's massive success, over $600 million at the global box office, there's no denying the sequel's potential to match or even exceed its predecessor. In fact, some analysts have already begun comparing it to the surprise long-tail success of Top Gun: Maverick, which not only opened big, but held strong for weeks through word-of-mouth momentum. A long-awaited sequel like Resurrection, especially with a spiritual undercurrent and devoted global audience, could follow a similar trajectory. Still, for Jim Caviezel, the journey hasn't been without consequence. The actor has openly stated that his role in the original film negatively impacted his career in Hollywood, yet that hasn't deterred him from returning to the role of Jesus. Despite stepping into political and ideological controversy in recent years, including controversial statements and conspiracy theories, Caviezel remains deeply committed to the sequel and its message. Love him or hate him, he believes in what this film represents, and so does Mel Gibson. Together, they're building what Caviezel has boldly called the Empire Strikes Back of Christianity. A cinematic reckoning, a spiritual spectacle, a resurrection on every level. Controversy, misconception, and the shadow of legacy. With anticipation building around the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, many eager viewers have taken to YouTube, hoping to catch a glimpse of the long-awaited sequel's official trailer. And at the risk of being the bearer of bad news, none of the trailers currently online are real. What you'll find instead are fan-made concept trailers, videos stitched together from scenes of the original film, enhanced with dramatic music and speculative text. While visually compelling, these are only artistic guesses at what the sequel might look like. Mel Gibson is yet to release any official footage. Given the filmmaker's history, this level of mystery and controversy comes as no surprise. The Passion of the Christ, starring Jim Caviezel as Jesus Christ, was a global event when it premiered, but it was far from universally praised. It received mixed reactions from critics and audiences alike. Some called it one of the most powerful and important biblical epics ever made. Others condemned it as offensive, excessively violent, and even dangerous. And yet, despite, or perhaps because of its controversy, the film became a box office juggernaut, still holding the record as the highest-grossing R-rated movie in U.S. domestic history. Originally, The Passion had the potential to be a film that inspired and educated, not just Christians, but audiences of all faiths. But for many, the film failed to fulfill that promise. Instead, it became a lightning rod for division, a platform that some hate groups use to push anti-Semitic narratives and distortions of history. Many viewers and religious leaders criticize Gibson for prioritizing shock value and graphic violence over spiritual depth or theological clarity. The movie's relentless brutality, while emotionally gripping, was seen by some as overwhelming, even manipulative. The rare quiet moments that did exist, scenes which might have deepened the viewer's understanding of Jesus' teachings and life, were brief and often overshadowed by the visceral imagery. Even the limited historical information presented in the film was called into question. For all its claims of biblical and historical accuracy, scholars have pointed out numerous inconsistencies, arguing that the main inaccuracy wasn't a single scene, but the entire tone and message of the film. Because Jesus Christ, as described in Scripture, is the embodiment of love, hope, mercy, and redemption. His presence, even in suffering, is meant to radiate divine compassion, a light shining in darkness. And yet, in the Passion of the Christ, this light is dimmed by the overwhelming focus on pain, cruelty, and despair. Instead of a Savior who leads with gentleness and grace, viewers were left with an image of a man consumed by violence, a figure stripped of the spiritual warmth that draws believers to him in the first place. This, perhaps more than any single controversy, is why the Passion of the Christ remains so divisive to this day, and why its sequel, Resurrection, carries with it such immense pressure to get it right, to not just stun audiences, but to elevate them, to remind viewers not only of the cost of grace, but of the joy and freedom it brings. The world is watching, the church is listening, and history will remember what the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, chooses to say next. Distortion, depiction, and the deep divide. Mel Gibson's portrayal of Jesus in the Passion of the Christ is deeply emotional, but also deeply controversial. Rather than highlighting Jesus as the embodiment of love, hope, and redemption, the film focuses almost entirely on pain, brutality, and hopelessness. That choice, while powerful on screen, opened the film to criticism for numerous biblical and historical inaccuracies. The very first scene, where Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane, is one example. He is approached by an androgynous, shadowy figure, a symbolic embodiment of Satan. As a giant serpent slithers toward Jesus, he crushes it beneath his foot, a dramatic visual meant to echo Genesis 3:15. However, there is no biblical account of Jesus slaying a serpent or being tempted by Satan in Gethsemane. This moment was crafted purely for cinematic effect. Another unsettling addition is the demonic baby, with pale, deformed features cradled mockingly by Satan during Jesus' torture. The image is striking, but it has no basis in Scripture, and critics argue it borders on grotesque fantasy rather than spiritual symbolism. Even the crucifixion, the film's emotional core, is filled with embellished imagery. Jesus is shown carrying the entire cross through the streets, a portrayal most historians dispute. Roman execution practices typically had victims carry only the crossbeam. Similarly, the film shows nails driven through Jesus' hands, a detail that is historically debated. Some scholars believe crucifixion victims were often tied rather than nailed to prolong suffering. The extreme torture scenes, while haunting, go beyond anything described in the Gospels. Nowhere does Scripture detail the level of violence portrayed in the film. Then there's the matter of Jesus' appearance. In the film, he is depicted with light skin, long flowing hair, and a neatly kept beard. But historical and anthropological evidence suggests that Jesus, a first-century Galilean Jew, would have likely had darker skin, shorter hair, and more rugged features. Even the loincloth that remains miraculously intact throughout the scourging and crucifixion contradicts historical records, where crucifixions were often completely stripped as a means of maximum humiliation. Other creative liberties also caused backlash. Jesus is portrayed as being fluent in Latin, speaking it with Roman authorities. In reality, it is highly unlikely he spoke more than a few words of Latin. And then there's the infamous scene in which Jesus invents the modern dining table, a scene rooted entirely in fiction and universally rejected by biblical scholars. But none of this compares to the film's most deeply divisive element, its alleged anti-Semitism. This accusation is especially charged, given Mel Gibson's own history of anti-Semitic remarks and public scandals. Critics point to the film's portrayal of Jewish characters as angry, bloodthirsty mobs, determined to make Jesus suffer. There's little ambiguity about who the film presents as the villains, and yet the deepest irony is often overlooked. Jesus was Jewish. He was born Jewish. He lived as a Jew. He died as a Jew. But this fundamental fact is never acknowledged in the film. Instead, the narrative implies that Jesus stood in opposition to the Jewish people, framing them as the antagonists in his story. This portrayal, widely condemned by both Jewish and Christian leaders, perpetuates a dangerous falsehood, one that has fueled centuries of prejudice. The backlash was fierce. Gibson struggled to secure distribution for the film, and many religious and political leaders publicly criticized its tone and message. One of the most contentious moments came with rumors that Pope John Paul II had endorsed the film. According to several reports, after a private screening, the Pope allegedly stated, "It is as it was. implying that he found the depiction historically accurate. The quote quickly spread through news outlets and religious publications, prompting a massive public response. Many expressed shock and dismay at what appeared to be papal approval of a film accused of fueling anti-Semitism. In response, the Vatican issued an official statement in January, attempting to clarify the matter. The statement read, "It is the Holy Father's custom not to express public judgments on artistic works, judgments which are always open to diverse evaluations of an aesthetic nature." The Vatican confirmed that the Pope had viewed the film, but neither confirmed nor denied the quote attributed to him. The ambiguity only deepened the controversy. In the end, The Passion of the Christ became more than just a film. It became a lightning rod, a mirror reflecting the complexities of faith, the dangers of artistic distortion, and the volatile power of storytelling in a fractured world. As we now await the Passion of the Christ, resurrection, that legacy remains unresolved. The new film has the chance to redeem, to elevate, or to divide once more. It all depends on how the story is told, and who it chooses to blame, glorify, and forgive. From controversy to resurrection, the story continues. The Vatican's response to Pope John Paul II's alleged endorsement of the Passion of the Christ only added to the confusion. In an official press release, the Church stated, "It is the Holy Father's custom not to express public judgments on artistic works, judgments which are always open to diverse evaluations of an aesthetic nature." And the statement confirmed that the Pope had viewed the film but neither confirmed nor denied the now famous quote, "It is as it was." No additional comment was made on the historical or theological controversies surrounding the film's content. Still, the message was clear. The Vatican was distancing itself from taking any official position on a film that had stirred both devotion and outrage in equal measure. The original Passion of the Christ was marked by unprecedented violence. Nearly the entire runtime is dedicated to whippings, beatings, torture, and crucifixion. Critics claimed it crossed the line from reverence into exploitation. Some moviegoers wept, others fainted. One woman even reportedly suffered a fatal heart attack during the crucifixion sequence. Legendary film critic Roger Ebert called it the most violent film I have ever seen. And if Mel Gibson's intent was to shock, to provoke, and to ignite global conversation, then he undeniably succeeded. The Passion of the Christ has since become one of the most controversial religious films of all time. And now, over 20 years later, a sequel is finally on the horizon, one that promises to be even more intense, more mystic, and even more polarizing. It has been officially announced, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection is coming. The long-awaited sequel will explore the 3 days between Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, focusing on his descent into hell and the spiritual warfare that unfolds there. Jim Caviezel returns in the role of Jesus, reprising the character that defined his career and changed his life. The sequel is expected to delve deeper into cosmic, theological, and symbolic territory, and it's already drawing speculation that it could face even greater backlash than its predecessor. Christo Jivkov was slated to return as the Apostle John before tragically passing away in March after a battle with cancer. Principal photography began shortly after, in April. The film is being produced independently and has been shooting across multiple locations, including Cinecittà Studios in Rome, as well as the ancient city of Matera and the ghost town of Craco, both in Italy's Basilicata region. Additional scenes will be filmed in Mexico, giving the project a truly international scope. Gibson has officially confirmed the sequel's development, and despite the years of speculation, it now appears to be moving forward with full force. Yet it remains clear, Resurrection will not be a quiet return. The original film took the world by storm, particularly among American evangelical audiences, but it also performed strongly in international markets. Christians across the globe embraced the film's bold R-rated intensity, drawn in by its mix of biblical narrative, Catholic mysticism, and the visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich, whose influence shaped much of the original screenplay. Still, the first film's success was shadowed by accusations of anti-Semitism, and many critics pointed to Gibson's personal controversies as a major factor in the backlash. The film's portrayal of Jewish figures and its thematic direction drew harsh criticism from religious leaders, historians, and cultural commentators alike. In spite of all this, or perhaps because of it, The Passion of the Christ remains one of the most important biblical epics ever made by Hollywood. Love it or hate it, it has left a permanent mark on cinematic history. Now, Mel Gibson is returning to the story, The Passion of the Christ. Resurrection is not just a sequel. It is an artistic and the spiritual gamble, an attempt to continue one of the most controversial and impactful religious narratives ever put to screen. And if Gibson delivers on what he's promised, this may not just be a resurrection story. It may be the cinematic resurrection of a legacy, a career, and a global conversation that never really ended. Production legacy and the resurrection of a cinematic epic. Mel Gibson returns to the director's chair with The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, co-writing the script alongside longtime collaborator Randall Wallace. Starring Jim Caviezel once again as Jesus, the film serves as a direct sequel to The Passion of the Christ, shifting its focus to the 3 days between Christ's death and resurrection. A period steeped in mystery, theology, and cosmic consequence. The sequel reunites several key cast members from the original, including Maya Morgenstern as Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Francesco DeVito as Peter the Apostle. Also returning was Christo Jivkov, set to reprise his role as John the Disciple, before tragically passing away in March after a battle with cancer. The film, currently titled The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, is scheduled to be released by Icon Entertainment International in the United States, with a target window between April and June, though no exact release date has been confirmed. Development on the sequel began years ago with Randall Wallace, who previously won an Academy Award for writing Braveheart and directed We Were Soldiers, confirming early on that he and Gibson had started shaping the narrative. Wallace stated their goal was to focus not just on the resurrection, but on the events surrounding it, including Jesus' descent into hell and his ultimate victory over death. In September of that development year, Gibson publicly expressed interest in directing the film, warning fans that it was a massive project and likely still years away. By January, Jim Caviezel was reportedly in talks to reprise his role as Jesus. In March, he revealed in interviews that Gibson had sent him the 3rd draft of the screenplay and that the film was in its 5th draft overall. Caviezel boldly predicted that the film would shock audiences and could be the biggest film the world has ever seen. Production was reported to begin in mid-spring. Principal photography officially started in April, with the film being produced independently. Shooting took place at Cinecittà Studios in Rome and on location in the historic city of Matera and the ghost town of Krakow, both located in Italy's Basilicata region. Additional filming is planned in Mexico. Despite the film's independent status, the ambition behind it is massive, and so is the weight of its legacy. The original Passion of the Christ was a box office phenomenon, particularly among American evangelicals, but it also resonated with Christian audiences around the world. Its raw, R-rated portrayal of Christ's suffering drew massive crowds, grossing over $600 million globally and becoming one of the most successful religious films of all time. The film was principally inspired by the Gospel of John, but it also incorporated Catholic traditions and the vivid, mystical visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich. While many saw the film as a spiritual milestone, it was also met with intense controversy, particularly due to accusations of anti-Semitism, which were only amplified by Gibson's own personal scandals and inflammatory comments. Still, The Passion of the Christ has come to be recognized as one of the most impactful biblical epics ever created by Hollywood. And now, Gibson appears poised to transform the story into a loose franchise, tapping into a trend where narrative universes outshine even their directors and stars. But whether Gibson can once again captivate the same audience and deliver a film that resonates in a vastly different world remains to be seen. A franchise in the making, cast, scope, and sequel potential. The evangelical audience that made The Passion of the Christ. A cultural milestone is once again watching closely as the sequel takes shape. Initially announced under the title, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, new information suggests the project may be even bigger than expected, according to a report by Coming Soon. The film's official IMDb page was updated in early November to reflect the title, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, Part 1. This subtle change strongly implies that Mel Gibson is developing a multi-part biblical saga. Jim Caviezel, who reprises his iconic role as Jesus, confirmed in interviews that the film might become 2 or even 3 parts, due to the story's spiritual scope and emotional depth. He also revealed that the script was completed as of September, and boldly predicted that this will be the biggest film in world history. Gibson is once again working with Randall Wallace, the Oscar-winning screenwriter of Braveheart. Wallace has expressed long-standing interest in telling the full arc of Jesus' resurrection and surrounding events. He once said, "The Passion was just the beginning. There's much more story to tell." And audiences agree. The evangelical community has consistently championed the original as the most impactful faith-based film ever made, and many believe the sequel has the potential to surpass it. One of the biggest updates to emerge from production is the confirmed return of Jim Caviezel. Since The Passion, Caviezel has appeared in a wide range of films and television series, including Outlander, The Prisoner, and Person of Interest. He also returned to biblical storytelling in Paul, Apostle of Christ, portraying Luke opposite James Faulkner's Paul. Caviezel has stayed close to the creative development of Resurrection, publicly discussing early drafts and his ongoing conversations with Gibson. He's clearly not just an actor returning to a role. He's a creative partner in this unfolding vision. Even more surprising is how many original cast members are expected to return. Maya Morgenstern is reportedly reprising her powerful role as Mary, the mother of Jesus. Francesco De Vito, known for his role in The Man from UN Satellite, will return as Peter, one of Jesus' most well-known apostles. Christo Jivkov, who passed away in 2023, had been set to reprise his role as John, whose gospel inspired much of the original film. It remains unclear if Monica Bellucci, Mary Magdalene, or Rosalinda Celentano, Satan, will return, but their presence in the sequel is highly anticipated. From a theological and narrative standpoint, The Passion of the Christ. Resurrection appears to be a natural continuation of the story. Christians around the world believe that after his crucifixion, Jesus descended into hell, conquered death, and rose again. The original film ended with just a fleeting glimpse of the resurrection. Now, Gibson appears ready to dive deep into the 3 days between death and resurrection, a time filled with both spiritual warfare and divine mystery. And with the scope growing and a franchise now on the table, it's clear that The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, is not just a sequel. It's the next chapter in an unfolding cinematic gospel. Visions, debate, and a glimpse of the resurrection. The Passion of the Christ ended with only the briefest glimpse of a resurrected Jesus. One quiet shot, hinting at a triumph to come. Now, years later, The Passion of the Christ. Resurrection promises to finally tell the rest of the story. But surprisingly, the resurrection itself may not be the film's central focus. Instead, according to long-circulating reports, the film will dive deep into the 3 mysterious days between Jesus' death and resurrection, a period that, for many Christians, holds profound spiritual significance. Many believe that during this time, Jesus descended into hell, not in defeat, but in triumph, to rescue the souls of the righteous and wage war on darkness itself. Though this event is only briefly alluded to in Scripture, it has been vividly explored in Catholic theology and mystic visions. Some of the most striking scenes in Resurrection are rumored to be inspired by the visions of Mary of Jesus of Agreda and Anne Catherine Emmerich, the 18th and 19th century mystics whose writings also shaped the first film. Emmerich described in detail an event Catholic theologians call the harrowing of hell, where Jesus breaks open the gates of the underworld, tears down its walls, and declares war on Satan and his kingdom. Such interpretations are controversial. While embraced by some, they are seen by others, particularly in evangelical circles, as extra-biblical and even theologically divisive. If Mel Gibson chooses to center Resurrection on this mystical descent, he may find it more difficult to unite the broad Christian audience that embraced the first film. Still, the project is moving forward, and as news of production finally began to surface, the internet, particularly Twitter, responded in predictable, humorous fashion. Users flooded timelines with parody titles, poking fun at the idea of a sequel to such a heavy and sacred film. But while many joked, others celebrated, because after years of rumors and delays, it appears Gibson is ready to return to set. Though no official theatrical release date has been announced, multiple reports claim that filming was expected to begin in mid-year, and has already begun in part. The film carries the official working title, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection. Interestingly, it may not be just one film. According to Jim Caviezel, the project may expand into a 2 or even 3-part saga due to the spiritual and narrative scope Gibson is hoping to achieve. The confirmed creative team includes Randall Wallace, who won an Oscar for writing Braveheart and directed We Were Soldiers. He and Gibson have been frequent collaborators, and their combined storytelling sensibilities, epic, emotional, and morally charged, are expected to shape the tone of Resurrection. Wallace acknowledged that the first film was just the beginning, and he has long expressed a desire to tell the full story of what happened after the crucifixion. The cast is also returning in significant numbers. Jim Caviezel once again portrays Jesus of Nazareth, despite having endured grueling challenges during the first shoot, including being struck by lightning, injured by the cross, and even using real blood in one scene. His return is both impressive and symbolic of the emotional weight this project carries for all involved. Also returning, Maya Morgenstern as Mary, the Virgin Mother, Francesco De Vito as Peter the Apostle, Christo Zhivkov, who portrayed John, before passing away in 2023. Whether or not the film will retain the original's linguistic authenticity, with dialogue spoken entirely in Hebrew, Latin, and Aramaic, remains unknown. But if Gibson chooses to continue that tradition, it would reinforce the film's dedication to immersing viewers in the world of first-century Judea. From what's been revealed so far, the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection will chronicle not only the moment of resurrection itself, but the spiritual battles, descent into hell, and cosmic redemption that unfolded during those lost 3 days, a period that changed eternity. A legacy in question, the resurrection's uncertain road ahead. Whether the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection will ever see the light of day remains to be seen. But recent updates have certainly stirred a wave of intrigue, speculation, and anticipation online. Star Jim Caviezel, who reprises his role as Jesus Christ, has made bold claims about the project, telling Breitbart News that the sequel will be the biggest film in world history. Caviezel, who played the Son of God in the original, confirmed he's read Mel Gibson's third draft of the script and described it as earth-shattering. If those claims are to be believed, Gibson isn't simply aiming for a sequel. He's aiming for a spiritual and cinematic event. The original Passion of the Christ became a cultural phenomenon. It shocked, moved, and divided audiences with its graphic depiction of Christ's final hours. Despite its heavy subject matter and R rating, the film earned over $600 million worldwide, making it one of the highest-grossing R-rated films of all time. But its success came with backlash. Critics lambasted the film for its excessive violence, historical liberties, and alleged anti-Semitic undertones, even among Christian audiences. The film sparked intense debate over whether its portrayal of Jesus emphasized pain over redemption. Still, the audience was undeniable and massive. Discussions about a sequel began surfacing not long after the first film's release. Reports revealed that Gibson and Randall Wallace, his Braveheart collaborator, had been quietly developing a story centered on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Wallace confirmed in interviews that development was underway, and in May of this year, he stated that discussions were still ongoing. More recently, Jim Caviezel provided further details. He confirmed the film's title, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, and reiterated that Gibson is taking his time to ensure the story is told with the scale and spiritual depth it demands. Despite some skepticism, the commitment is clear. Gibson has commented in the past on the enormous scope of the sequel, hinting at a much broader narrative that transcends the earthly and enters the spiritual realms of heaven, hell, and resurrection glory. But whether the audience that once made the original a global hit will return in similar numbers is a far less certain question. Today's world is very different from 2004. While modern audiences have become more desensitized to violence, they are also far less tolerant of material considered offensive, insensitive, or theologically polarizing. Social media has made discourse faster and more unforgiving, and the idea of a film like Resurrection navigating that terrain is daunting. Complicating matters further is Mel Gibson himself, now one of the most polarizing figures in Hollywood. His history of arrests, racist and anti-Semitic tirades, and ongoing personal controversies make him a challenging figure for both studios and audiences. While his directorial comeback, Hacksaw Ridge, was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Director and Best Picture, many in the industry remain wary of fully embracing his return. And yet, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection could be the very project that forces that conversation once again. The film is shaping up to be not just a continuation of a story, but a resurrection of a legacy, and perhaps even an artist. Gibson's vision of Jesus, first told with startling brutality, may now evolve into something far more cosmic, redemptive, and mythic. With Jim Caviezel back in the role of a risen Christ and with a renewed focus on spiritual warfare, resurrection power, and divine victory, the sequel may transform The Passion into a biblical saga unlike anything Hollywood has ever attempted. Whether it will unite, divide, or astound remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the world will be watching. The return of a visionary, Mel Gibson's resurrection and redemption. In a recent interview, actor Jim Caviezel confirmed what fans have long hoped to hear. Work is actively underway on the highly ambitious sequel to The Passion of the Christ. And for director Mel Gibson, it could mark not only the resurrection of a biblical narrative, but also a resurrection of his career. After years spent in the shadows following high-profile scandals, Gibson has been cautiously rebuilding. The sequel to his 2004 global blockbuster may become the project that brings him fully back into the spotlight. He recently confirmed that the film is in development and officially titled The Passion of the Christ Resurrection. Gibson made the announcement during a rare public appearance at the Soul Harvest event, where he sat down for an interview with Pastor Greg Laurie. For the first time in years, he opened up about the sequel, discussing its title and the creative and spiritual challenges involved in developing such a monumental project. Screenwriter Randall Wallace, who previously collaborated with Gibson on Braveheart and We Were Soldiers, also revealed that the evangelical community has been calling for a sequel for years, believing it could be even more impactful than the original. But meeting those expectations is no small feat. To date, The Passion of the Christ remains one of the most successful R-rated films in cinematic history. Until Deadpool claimed the top spot, it was the highest-grossing R-rated movie of all time, earning over $600 million worldwide on a modest budget. Despite its critical controversies and polarizing reception, the film was undeniably a cultural phenomenon. At present, the sequel does not yet have a studio or financial backers, but with Gibson directing and Wallace writing, industry insiders believe it's only a matter of time before that changes. For years, Gibson avoided directing altogether and only took occasional roles in smaller films. But his return to form began with Hacksaw Ridge, a brutal yet inspirational war drama starring Andrew Garfield. It marked Gibson's first time directing since Apocalypto, and it earned 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Director and Best Picture. He also returned to acting in Bloodfather, a gritty action film that was well received by audiences, and currently holds a strong rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, Resurrection represents something more, a personal and professional reckoning. The film is still in the early stages of development, with Wallace reportedly still working on the script. There's no confirmed release date yet, nor has Caviezel's return as Jesus been officially announced, but all signs point to him once again donning the crown of thorns. The original film was a monumental moment in cinema, breaking records and boundaries. Its unflinching portrayal of Christ's suffering was seen by many as the most brutal and well-crafted depiction of the crucifixion ever made. For some, it was a spiritual experience. For others, it was a cinematic endurance test. But what cannot be denied is the emotional gravity it carried. The Passion of the Christ moved audiences, challenged belief systems, and forced viewers to confront the cost of redemption. It painted one of the most iconic images in Western culture, a broken man, nailed to a cross, crowned with thorns, through the lens of extreme suffering. Yet beyond the brutality, the film inspired awe in the realms of miracle, celestial mystery, loyalty, betrayal, and ultimate forgiveness. This is the burden and the opportunity Resurrection now carries. Regardless of how one feels about Gibson's personal journey, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection has reignited curiosity, controversy, and conversation. It has stirred excitement, hope, skepticism, and even dread. The very idea of a sequel has long been a cultural punchline. Shows like Family Guy once joked about the absurdity of following up a crucifixion. But as Jim Caviezel recently stated after reading a new draft of the script, we may be in for Gibson's magnum opus, a film he calls The Empire Strikes Back of Christianity. This time the stakes are higher, the questions are deeper, and the world is watching more closely than ever but for faith, fantasy, and the Empire Strikes Back of Christianity. Actor Jim Caviezel has made a bold declaration: The Passion of the Christ. Resurrection will be nothing less than the Empire Strikes Back of Christianity, a spiritual sequel of staggering ambition, and one that, according to early reports, must be seen to be believed. little is officially known about Mel Gibson's full vision for the film. But clues are starting to emerge from interviews, fan speculation, and theological source material. Among the most intriguing insights comes from Helen Bond, a respected professor of Christian origins and the New Testament. Her book, Faith and Fantasy in the Passion of the Christ Resurrection, explores the intersection of scriptural foundation and cinematic imagination, a space where Gibson seems ready to fully unleash his mythic instincts. While Satan made only a few brief, disturbing appearances in the first film, early rumors suggest the sequel may spend significant time in hell. If true, audiences could be treated to Gibson's haunting, surreal interpretation of eternal suffering, spiritual war, and divine rescue. Some believe the descent into hell will be so visually intense that it may make Hellraiser 2, Hellbound, look tame by comparison. Horror fans, fantasy lovers, and the spiritually curious may find themselves drawn to this nightmarish religious epic, which promises to break free from the typical constraints of the faith-based genre. In that way, it may do what Darren Aronofsky's Noah attempted years ago: infuse a biblical story with a tone more akin to myth or dark fantasy. That film famously depicted angels as towering, rocky stone creatures, a daring artistic risk that divided viewers but also sparked fascination. Similarly, Resurrection may employ surreal or symbolic representations of celestial beings, perhaps sentient trees, living rocks, or cosmic forms beyond human comprehension. This creative tension is one of the great challenges of biblical filmmaking. How do you depict the unknowable without alienating the faithful? Filmmakers often wrestle with whether to visualize the sacred or leave it ambiguous, allowing viewers to project their own understanding. But Mel Gibson is not known for subtlety, and Resurrection may very well defy tradition. Indeed, Gibson has hinted at something even more cosmic. During an appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, he alluded to another realm, one not confined to hell, nor even to earth. His comments were vague, but open-ended enough to invite speculation about ancient alien theory, cosmic theology, and a no-holds-barred dive into biblical mythology as interdimensional epic. While it sounds far-fetched, some have noted Gibson's references parallel Marvel's Celestials, godlike alien beings with vast lifespans who occasionally interfere in human affairs. It's mythology colliding with theology, and it invites comparisons to Zeus, Elohim, and the Watchers of apocalyptic literature. Could Resurrection go that far? Might we see Gibson's take on God's spaceship or the laboratory of creation? Unlikely, but not impossible. Whatever the case, what's clear is that Gibson is crafting a story that will redefine genre expectations. This won't be a standard retelling of the Resurrection. It's shaping up to be a cosmic war for the soul of creation, a mythic descent into the pit of despair followed by a blinding ascension into glory. And while this kind of spiritual spectacle may excite genre fans, it could also alienate traditional audiences, especially those who prefer their theology literal and their depictions conservative. But that's exactly where The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection may thrive, between reverence and revolution, scripture and spectacle. It's a film that dares to ask, what if the greatest story ever told wasn't finished? Non-linear visions, cosmic resurrection, and a return to glory. In multiple interviews, Mel Gibson has emphasized that The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection will not follow a traditional linear narrative. While the film centers on the resurrection of Jesus, it will likely depart significantly from how the story is told in the Gospels. Gibson has hinted that the film will revolve around a central event, but will be interwoven with surreal, symbolic, and theological sequences juxtaposing timelines, realms, and realities. He has remained cryptic, offering hints and clues without revealing the full narrative arc. What we do know is this: there will be a massive focus on Jesus' descent into hell, a period largely unexplored in mainstream biblical cinema. According to early Christian tradition, after his death, Jesus descended into the underworld to liberate the souls of the righteous, those who had awaited redemption. While the Bible only mentions this briefly, this concept, known in theology as the harrowing of hell, is richly detailed in Catholic mysticism, particularly in the visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich. Her writings describe Jesus walking among the lost, revealing himself as the Messiah, and delivering the faithful from torment, ushering them into the company of saints and prophets. If Gibson draws heavily from this tradition, audiences may witness a sweeping, otherworldly odyssey, unlike anything seen in religious cinema. Of course, the film is also expected to depict Jesus' resurrection and ascension, possibly in visually stylized or abstract form. Some speculate that Gibson may use de-aging technology to present a glorified, perfect version of the risen Christ. The Ascension might be bathed in radiant light, with overexposed cinematography to preserve an air of divine mystery, a choice designed to align with the faith-based experience. Alternatively, Gibson might lean into realism, allowing Jim Caviezel's aging features to serve the narrative, portraying a rugged, resurrected man, still bearing the raw wounds of crucifixion. That version would be deeply human, powerfully visceral, and deeply controversial. And controversy is something Mel Gibson knows how to navigate. If Gibson gets technically ambitious with the Ascension, he might embrace a sci-fi-infused vision, complete with celestial spacecrafts, alien-like angelic beings, or luminous divine figures clad in flowing white robes. Think Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal, where the mystics and the Skeksis merge into godlike beings of light. This kind of imaginative, allegorical approach could captivate genre fans while polarizing faith-based audiences. Indeed, some even speculate Gibson may explore cosmic theology, with divine forces portrayed through ancient alien archetypes, a direction not entirely out of step with his past comments on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, where he alluded to another realm beyond traditional heaven and hell. Such a mythic, interdimensional interpretation would echo ideas from Marvel's Celestials, powerful beings with lifespans far beyond human understanding, often taking form in ways that blend the divine with the extraterrestrial. Whether Gibson truly intends to explore such fantastical imagery is unknown, but what is clear is this: Resurrection will not be a safe or sanitized sequel. It will be a cinematic experiment, a spiritual epic that spans time, space, myth, and theology. And based on the massive success of the first film, there's every reason to believe Resurrection could be just as commercially explosive. Comparisons have even been made to Top Gun, Maverick, another long-awaited sequel that defied expectations, dominated the box office for multiple weekends, and reasserted the power of emotional spectacle on the big screen. For Jim Caviezel, returning to the role of Jesus is not without cost. He has openly stated that the Passion may have negatively affected his career, and in recent years, he has made headlines for controversial political views and conspiracy-related comments. Yet for both Caviezel and Gibson, Resurrection may offer something deeper than a comeback. It may be their final statement, their ultimate act of defiance and devotion, wrapped in a story that transcends the screen. Regardless of how the film is received, one thing is certain: it will not go unnoticed. Controversy, concept trailers, and the ongoing debate. Mel Gibson is no stranger to controversy, and with all the anticipation surrounding the Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, many fans have taken to YouTube in hopes of finding a trailer. But at the risk of disappointment, none of the trailers currently online are real. These so-called trailers are fan-made concept edits, cobbled together from scenes of the original film or unrelated media to speculate on what the sequel might look like. Still, their very existence reflects the massive cultural interest in what could be one of the most daring biblical films ever made. Given Mel Gibson's complex history, it's hardly surprising that the sequel is already surrounded by intense controversy. After all, the original film, The Passion of the Christ, sparked global debate upon release. Starring Jim Caviezel as Jesus of Nazareth, the 2004 biblical drama drew international attention and a deeply polarized response. Some called it one of the most important religious epics ever made, while others dismissed it as offensive, historically misleading, and emotionally manipulative. And yet, despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy, the film broke records. It became the highest-grossing R-rated movie in US history, a title it held for years. But the film's success didn't protect it from criticism. Many believe The Passion had the potential to be an educational and spiritual experience, not just for Christians, but for people of all faiths. Instead, it became, for some, a catalyst for division, inadvertently giving fuel to hate groups who used its message to promote anti-Semitic ideologies and distorted historical narratives. Critics accuse Gibson of placing shock value over spiritual truth, citing the film's relentless focus on brutality and torture, while offering little theological context or exploration of Jesus' teachings. The few quiet moments not consumed by violence, they argued, did little to convey the true heart of Christ's message. And then there were the historical and biblical inaccuracies. Though The Passion was marketed as a faithful retelling of Jesus' final hours, it took several creative liberties, some inspired by Catholic mystics, others by cinematic dramatization. The most notable example comes in the film's opening sequence. Jesus is seen praying in the Garden of Gethsemane when he is confronted by a mysterious androgynous figure cloaked in darkness, an implied embodiment of Satan. A giant serpent slithers from the figure's feet toward Jesus, who then stomps it to death. The scene, while cinematic, is not found anywhere in the Gospels. It appears to be a symbolic reference to the book of Genesis, specifically the prophecy that the Messiah will crush the serpent's head. But the visual literalization of this metaphor was seen by many scholars as theologically sloppy and misleading. It was just one of many additions or exaggerations made in the name of cinematic intensity. Distorted visions and accusations of anti-Semitism. Among the most haunting and controversial images in The Passion of the Christ is the unnerving figure of a demon baby. As Jesus is brutally tortured, Satan is seen cradling a pale, deformed infant with an eerie grin. The grotesque scene plays out like a twisted mockery of the Madonna and Child. This moment, while visually jarring, is nowhere to be found in Scripture. Instead, it's an example of Hollywood dramatization at its most surreal, created for symbolic impact and cinematic shock value. But to many, it felt unnecessary, confusing, and spiritually unmoored. The crucifixion itself was also heavily embellished. The film shows Jesus carrying the entire weight of the cross alone through the streets of Jerusalem, collapsing under its crushing burden. However, historians and biblical scholars widely believe that only the horizontal crossbeam, patitibulum, would have been carried, not the full crucifix. Even more debated is the method of the crucifixion. While the film graphically depicts nails being driven through Jesus' hands, many scholars assert that crucifixions were often carried out by tying victims to the cross rather than nailing them, a method that prolonged suffering but was less gruesome. The torture scenes are similarly exaggerated. While the Gospels mention that Jesus was flogged and mocked, the film presents an almost horror movie level of violence, dwelling on graphic detail that some found more exploitative than reverent. Nowhere in Scripture does it describe such prolonged and methodical brutality. Even Jesus' appearance in the film drew criticism. While many have come to associate Jesus with the fair-skinned, bearded figure popularized in Western art, there is no biblical or historical consensus on what he actually looked like. Scholars suggest that, as a first-century Jew from the Middle East, Jesus likely had darker skin and hair, a far cry from the European features shown in The Passion. Another historical inaccuracy lies in the use of language. In the film, Jesus speaks fluent Latin, especially during his trial before Pontius Pilate. In reality, it is unlikely that Jesus would have spoken Latin beyond a few phrases. His primary languages would have been an Aramaic and Hebrew, with some Greek. Even minor details were fictionalized, such as a scene showing Jesus inventing the modern dining table, a moment entirely fabricated for emotional effect. Though small, these additions underscore the tension between faithful representation and cinematic license. But perhaps the most damaging and divisive element in The Passion of the Christ is its alleged anti-Semitism. The film paints a stark picture. The Jewish leaders and crowds are portrayed as an angry, vengeful mob, relentlessly demanding Jesus' execution. While Roman soldiers are clearly the ones carrying out the crucifixion, the Jewish characters are framed as the instigators, the ones thirsting for his suffering. This portrayal sparked an outcry from both Jewish and Christian communities, who accused the film of perpetuating the false and dangerous narrative that the Jewish people were to blame for Jesus' death, a notion with deep and tragic historical consequences. The irony, of course, is profound. Jesus was Jewish. He was born Jewish, lived as a Jew, and died as a Jew. Yet this crucial truth is barely acknowledged in the film. Instead, the narrative positions the Jewish people as the antagonists, which critics argue reinforces long-standing prejudices. This perception was not helped by Mel Gibson's own controversies, including past statements and remarks widely regarded as anti-Semitic. His personal reputation only added fuel to the fire, making it harder to separate the filmmaker from the message. As a result of the film's perceived bias, Gibson struggled to secure distribution, and the backlash was swift and vocal. From religious leaders, scholars, politicians, and interfaith coalitions. One of the more unusual flashpoints came from reports that Pope John Paul II had viewed the film in a private screening and declared, "It is as it was." The quote was interpreted as a papal endorsement of the film's accuracy, prompting further outrage and debate. Later, the Vatican issued a carefully worded clarification stating that the Pope does not customarily make public judgments about artistic works and that the comment, if made, was not intended as doctrinal endorsement. The damage, however, had been done. The film had become more than a movie. It was now a symbol, both revered and reviled. A divisive legacy and a sequel on the horizon. The unexpected endorsement of The Passion of the Christ by Pope John Paul II added fuel to an already roaring fire. Reports circulated that, after a private screening, the pontiff had uttered the phrase, "It is as it was." The implication that the Pope believed the film was historically accurate sparked a media frenzy. As backlash mounted, the Vatican issued an official statement in January, attempting to clarify. The release explained that the Holy Father typically refrains from making public judgments on artistic works, noting that such judgments are open to diverse evaluations of aesthetic nature. While the statement did confirm the Pope had seen the film, it neither confirmed nor denied the now infamous quote, leaving the public in a fog of ambiguity. But one thing remained clear. The Passion of the Christ had become a cultural flashpoint. Critics and audiences alike pointed to the film's unrelenting violence as a core concern. Much of the runtime is dedicated to Jesus being whipped, stabbed, beaten, bashing, and brutally tortured. Many believe the extreme brutality overshadowed the spiritual message. Some viewers reported emotional breakdowns while watching the film, crying, fainting, and even, in one tragic case, a woman reportedly suffering a fatal heart attack during the crucifixion scene. Renowned critic Roger Ebert called it the most violent film I have ever seen. If Mel Gibson's goal was to create a deeply controversial religious epic, he unquestionably succeeded. Now, nearly 2 decades later, a sequel is on the horizon, one said to push the boundaries even further. After years of speculation and stalled development, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection is officially underway. It will chronicle the 3 mysterious days between Jesus' crucifixion and his resurrection, focusing on his descent into hell, his battle against the kingdom of darkness, and his triumph over death itself. Jim Caviezel will return as Jesus, reprising the role that defined and reshaped his career. Tragically, Christo Jivkov, who played John the Apostle, passed away in March 2023, but was reportedly involved in the early stages of production. Filming began in April, taking place at Sata Studios in Rome, and on location in Matera and the ghost town of Krakow in Italy's Basilicata region. Additional scenes are expected to be shot in Mexico. The film is being produced independently, much like its predecessor, which itself became one of the most successful independent films in history. Despite controversy, The Passion of the Christ resonated deeply, especially among American evangelicals, and found surprising success in international markets as well. Much of its emotional power came from drawing not just on the Gospels, but also on Catholic mystical visions, particularly those of Anne Catherine Emmerich, blending scripture with intense visual allegory. The same approach appears to be returning in the sequel. Early reports suggest that the project has grown so vast in scale that it may become a multi-part saga. According to Caviezel, it might be 2 films, maybe even 3. Screenwriter Randall Wallace, who penned Braveheart, has once again teamed up with Gibson to bring this sequel to life. He described the first film as just the beginning, and insists there's much more of the story left to tell. For many in the evangelical community, The Passion of the Christ remains the most powerful faith-based film ever made, and they believe the sequel could be even greater. Of course, this raises the question, can Mel Gibson pull off another miracle? In a cinematic era dominated by franchises and universes, The Passion of the Christ Resurrection may very well become a spiritual franchise, one that continues to divide, inspire, challenge, and provoke. The question isn't just whether Gibson can match the impact of the first film. The question is, can he transcend it? A legacy continues, returning cast, and the descent into darkness. One of the most exciting confirmations surrounding The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, is the return of Jim Caviezel in the iconic role of Jesus Christ. For Caviezel, the original film remains one of the highest profile roles of his career, earning him acclaim and controversy in equal measure. Since then, Caviezel has appeared in a variety of film and television projects, including Outlander, The Prisoner, and the CBS hit series Person of Interest. He even revisited the biblical genre in Paul, Apostle of Christ, portraying Luke, alongside James Faulkner's Paul. His continued presence in spiritually charged roles has kept him close to the heartbeat of faith-based storytelling and to ongoing discussions about the sequel. And he's not alone. A surprising number of cast members from the original Passion are expected to return, continuing the biblical epic's emotional and spiritual journey. Maya Morgenstern, who gave a deeply moving performance as Mary, the mother of Jesus, is reportedly returning to reprise her role. Francesco De Vito, known for his portrayal of Peter, one of Jesus' most fervent followers, will also return. Perhaps most poignantly, Christo Zhivkov, who played John the Apostle, the gospel author whose account the Passion primarily drew from, was reportedly involved in early production before his tragic passing in 2023. His presence will be deeply felt. As of now, it remains unconfirmed whether Monica Bellucci, Mary Magdalene, or Rosalinda Celentano, Satan, will return, though their characters left a strong impression on audiences. The sequel appears to be taking a theologically logical next step, focusing on what Christians believe happened between the crucifixion and the resurrection. The original film ended with a brief but powerful glimpse of the resurrected Christ. But resurrection will journey into the mysterious 3 days in the tomb, when many Christians believe Jesus descended into hell. This concept, known as the harrowing of hell, has long existed in early church traditions and Catholic mysticism, but is rarely portrayed in film. According to mystical visions from figures such as Mary of Jesus of Agreda and Anne Catherine Emmerich, Jesus did not simply rest in death. He waged war in the depths of hell, tearing down its gates and liberating the souls of the righteous. Emmerich's visions in particular have influenced Gibson before, and her depiction of Christ's triumph over darkness could form the dramatic and symbolic core of the new film. However, this bold narrative direction is not without risk. The harrowing of hell is only briefly alluded to in Scripture, mentioned in vague references such as 1 Peter chapter 3:19 and Ephesians 4:9. Because of this, the idea remains theologically debated, particularly among Protestant audiences. If Gibson leans heavily on Catholic mysticism and apocryphal visions, he may find it more difficult to unite the broad evangelical audience that rallied around the original film. Still, the ambition is undeniable. The return to principal photography, long delayed, has reignited both devotion and satire. The internet has responded with a wave of speculation and humor, with users coining fictional sequel titles like The Passion of the Christ, Judgment Day, or The Passion of the Christ, The Reckoning. But underneath the memes is a genuine anticipation. The first film's release was polarizing. Many called it a religious and holy experience, while others found its depiction of suffering excessive and spiritually off-putting. Now, as Gibson moves forward with Resurrection, he faces the monumental task of honoring the past while reshaping the story for a new era. The legacy lives on: box office glory, online buzz, and a return to the set. While some critics decried The Passion of the Christ for its graphic violence and alleged anti-Semitic undertones, its box office success was undeniable. Starring Jim Caviezel as Jesus of Nazareth, the film grossed over $600 million worldwide, including more than $370 million domestically, making it the highest-grossing R-rated movie of all time, a record it still holds to this day. And now a long-anticipated sequel is poised to build on that legacy. According to recent reports, production for The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection is finally getting underway. Jim Caviezel has already called the film the biggest movie in world history, and with filming reportedly scheduled to begin within the next few months, the momentum is once again building. The internet, of course, has had a field day. On Twitter, users flooded the timeline with mock sequel titles, some humorous, others absurd, offering up names like Jesus, Endgame, or Resurrection, The Reckoning. But those hoping to see a real teaser trailer or promotional rollout may be disappointed. The sequel already has an official working title, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, and no public trailer has been released just yet. Still, after nearly 2 decades of development, Mel Gibson seems ready to return to the director's chair. There's been no official announcement regarding a release date, but the production's slow build and secretive nature have only added to the intrigue. Once again, Gibson will collaborate with screenwriter Randall Wallace, his longtime creative partner. The two famously worked together on Braveheart, for which Wallace won an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, and on the war epic We Were Soldiers. Wallace's involvement lends additional narrative weight and historical depth to the sequel. Jim Caviezel's return is both impressive and inspiring. His experience on the first film was physically grueling and emotionally intense. He was struck by lightning, injured by the cross, and even used his own blood in one scene. And yet he returns, unwavering in his commitment to portraying the most pivotal figure in history. Several original cast members are also expected to reprise their roles. Maya Morgenstern returns as Mary, the Virgin Mother. Francesco DeVito will again portray Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples. The late Christo Zhivkov, who played John the Apostle, was involved in the early stages of production before his passing, his legacy woven into the heart of the film. The sequel may even take the same authentic linguistic approach as the original, with dialogue in Hebrew, Latin, and Aramaic, the dead languages of the time, adding realism and reverence to the cinematic experience. Its title, Resurrection, offers clarity on the portion of the story it will cover, the 3 days between Jesus' death and resurrection, culminating in the most significant event in Christian theology. Whether the film will ever make it to theaters remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the announcement of its production has already reignited fascination, debate, and devotion online. The Passion has returned. A return to glory or a risk too great? Jim Caviezel has boldly declared that The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, will be the biggest film in world history. It's a monumental claim, but one rooted in the legacy of the original film. In 2004, Caviezel portrayed Jesus Christ in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, a harrowing depiction of Christ's final hours. The film became a cultural phenomenon and one of the most talked about religious films in cinema history. Despite heavy criticism for its graphic violence, historical liberties, and accusations of anti-Semitism, it achieved staggering box office success. With a global total exceeding $600 million, the film remains among the highest-grossing R-rated films of all time, and still holds the top spot domestically for an R-rated release. In May of this year, screenwriter Randall Wallace, Gibson's longtime collaborator, confirmed that discussions about a sequel were ongoing. Caviezel has since offered more insight, stating in an interview with Breitbart News that he had read Mel Gibson's third draft of the script and that the vision is massive in scope. It's clear Gibson is taking his time, not just to get the details right, but to build something epic. He has previously spoken about the scale and ambition he hopes to achieve with Resurrection, emphasizing that this sequel will not be a simple continuation. It will be something entirely transformational. That said, critical response to the original Passion was deeply divided. While some found the film to be emotionally moving and spiritually profound, others condemned its unrelenting violence and problematic portrayals, particularly its depiction of Jewish figures. Despite earning 3 Academy Award nominations, the film's reception remains a topic of controversy. The biggest question now is whether audiences, especially younger, more culturally sensitive generations, will turn out in the same numbers nearly 2 decades later. The world has changed. There is more tolerance for violence and entertainment, perhaps, but less tolerance for anything perceived as culturally or religiously offensive. In today's climate, a film like The Passion of the Christ 2 would walk a razor-thin line between faithful storytelling and provocative cinema. And then there's Mel Gibson himself. Once a titan of Hollywood, Gibson has become one of the industry's most controversial figures following multiple public scandals, including allegations of racism, anti-Semitic remarks, and abusive behavior. Although his 2016 war film Hacksaw Ridge was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, his presence remains divisive. Still, Gibson's return to the director's chair for Resurrection could mark a career resurgence. This is, without question, one of his most high-profile undertakings since his fall from grace, and he seems determined to shape it into a spiritual epic unlike anything before. With Caviezel back in the lead role and Wallace at his side, Gibson has assembled a team that believes in the vision, despite the risks, despite the scrutiny, despite the odds. Whether The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection becomes a historic cinematic triumph or a lightning rod for renewed controversy, one thing is certain: the world will be watching. Mel Gibson speaks, a darker vision and a bold return. After years of silence and speculation, Mel Gibson finally broke the silence. At a recent appearance during the Soul Harvest event, Gibson sat down for a rare interview with Pastor Greg Laurie, where the subject of the Passion of the Christ 2 inevitably came up. Gibson took the opportunity to officially confirm what many had hoped for. The sequel is not only real, it's in motion. He revealed the film's working title, The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection. Alongside screenwriter Randall Wallace, Gibson has been quietly developing the project for years. Wallace, who penned Braveheart and directed We Were Soldiers, explained that the evangelical community has long been calling for a sequel, believing it could surpass even the original's impact. A tall order, to say the least. Though currently lacking a major studio or formal backers, the film is moving forward, given Gibson's clout and the massive success of the original. That's likely to change quickly. Still, Resurrection remains in its early stages. Wallace continues to refine the script, and while no official release date has been announced, Gibson's commitment is unwavering. Jim Caviezel, though not yet formally confirmed, is widely expected to return as Jesus, a role he has previously called the most important of his life. Gibson, who has spent years largely sidelined by scandal, may be seeking a career renaissance through this film. After his explosive fall from grace, Gibson returned to the director's chair with 2016's Hacksaw Ridge, which earned 6 Academy Award nominations and reinvigorated his standing in Hollywood. It was his first directorial effort since Apocalypto, and its success demonstrated he still had a mastery of visceral storytelling. His next venture, however, dives into far darker spiritual waters. If early reports are accurate, Resurrection will center not just on the moment of Jesus' return from death, but on the 3 harrowing days in between. This includes what many Christians refer to as the harrowing of hell, Christ's descent into the underworld to confront Satan, liberate the righteous, and declare dominion over death. This dramatic choice has already sparked theological debate. Based partially on apocryphal texts and the visions of Catholic mystics like Anne Catherine Emmerich, this narrative is not fully supported by Scripture but holds deep roots in Catholic tradition. Gibson explored similar mystic influences in the first film, and all signs suggest he plans to amplify that vision tenfold in the sequel. The visual implications are staggering. Some have likened the potential imagery to Clive Barker's Hellraiser, with scenes of torment, war, and cosmic rebellion. Online speculation even compares the scope to something out of Star Wars or Marvel, with celestial warfare, otherworldly realms, and spiritual dimensions beyond human comprehension. Indeed, this may not just be a resurrection story. It could be a mythological, psychological, and cosmic battle between divine light and infernal darkness. Even comparisons to Darren Aronofsky's Noah have surfaced, a film that merged biblical tradition with fantastical elements like stone angels and apocalyptic visions. And yet, where Noah played loosely with myth, Gibson seems intent on crafting something visually bold, yet emotionally and spiritually anchored. For all its ambition, the challenge is clear. How do you depict angels, demons, and the soul of Jesus without alienating faith-based audiences? Filmmakers are often torn between artistic interpretation and spiritual reverence. Should angels be sentient light or glowing giants? Should hell be an abyss of agony or a metaphorical prison of regret? And what exactly does resurrection look like on screen? Gibson seems poised to answer all these questions, and perhaps to redefine faith-based cinema itself. Celestial controversies and cosmic interpretations. When depicting divine beings, God, angels, demons, filmmakers face a delicate balance. How do you visualize the unseeable, portray the unknowable, and interpret the sacred without alienating those who hold these concepts as truth? In most religious films, sacred entities are often portrayed with intentional vagueness. This allows spiritual audiences to interpret the characters through their own beliefs while still preserving the mystery and reverence of the subject matter. Filmmakers tend to rely on universal metaphors, light, fire, wind, or natural textures, to convey the presence of divine power. But Mel Gibson may not follow that safe path. Given his reputation for bold creative risks and his instincts to defy conventional wisdom, The Passion of the Christ. Resurrection could break from tradition with vivid and controversial representations of celestial realms. In recent interviews, particularly on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Gibson dropped cryptic hints about a realm outside of hell that plays a major role in the film. Some fans and critics have interpreted his comments as an allusion to ancient alien theory, a controversial concept that suggests divine beings may have extraterrestrial origins. Whether literal or metaphorical, this idea invites cosmic speculation. There's even talk of Gibson showing audiences God's spaceship or some kind of celestial laboratory, a visual and thematic departure that might draw comparisons to the Marvel Cinematic Universe's take on gods and cosmic entities, such as the Celestials, powerful beings who shape life, govern galaxies, and transcend time. It might sound fantastical, but the blend of myth, faith, and fantasy is not new. Darren Aronofsky's Noah introduced stone-like angels in a post-apocalyptic tone. William Shatner's scrapped Star Trek V concept pitched Captain Kirk confronting God himself. Gibson, in a similar vein, might be preparing for a no-holds-barred biblical mythos, rich with symbolic surrealism and spiritual warfare on a cosmic scale. What we do know is this: Gibson has said resurrection will not follow a linear structure. Instead, it will center around a main event, the resurrection of Jesus, but will weave together various spiritual encounters, dimensions, and revelations. Central to that narrative is the harrowing of hell. According to early Christian traditions and mystic visions, particularly those of Anne Catherine Emmerich after his crucifixion, Jesus descended into the underworld to rescue the righteous souls who had died before his coming. The film may draw heavily from these non-canonical sources, showing Christ tearing down hell's gates and liberating the innocent from eternal suffering. Scenes may depict Jesus as a conquering redeemer, gathering lost souls and revealing his divine nature before ushering them into the blessed company of saints and prophets. And what about the resurrection itself? Gibson might portray the risen Christ in a picture-perfect form, using digital de-aging technology to achieve an idealized vision of divinity, radiant, whole, and otherworldly. Alternatively, he may embrace Jim Caviezel's age and humanity, showing a scarred, weathered Jesus. A man who has truly suffered, died, and returned, changed. Such a choice would undoubtedly invite intense debate, not just in churches, but across theological circles, film critics, and horror fandoms alike. Light, ambiguity, and overexposure could bathe the ascension, creating a moment that is felt more than seen, blinding, beautiful, and open to interpretation. Or Gibson might go in the opposite direction, crafting a science fiction-infused finale complete with celestial technology, angelic armies, and heavenly realms. Such bold imagery would thrill genre fans, but risk alienating the core faith-based audience that elevated the first film into a global success. Yet controversy has never stopped Gibson before. Heavenly realms or science fiction? The cosmic speculation continues. If Mel Gibson decides to get truly imaginative with the ascension of Christ, the passion of the Christ, resurrection may lean not just into spiritual allegory, but full-blown science fiction. There are whispers that Gibson could depict celestial spaceships, angelic lords in majestic white robes, or even a visual spectacle akin to Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal. A world where beings of light merge into godlike creatures, glowing with power, wisdom, and otherworldly majesty. A concept like that would undoubtedly thrill genre fans, but it would also risk alienating traditional religious viewers who may find such interpretations too far removed from canonical scripture. Still, Gibson is no stranger to controversy, and if anyone is bold enough to reimagine heaven with a mythic, surreal edge, it's him. Whether Gibson chooses to go minimal and symbolic or spectacular and cosmic remains to be seen. What is certain is that Resurrection has the potential to be a box office juggernaut, especially given the legacy of its predecessor. When The Passion of the Christ premiered, it took the world by storm, not just as a film, but as a cultural event. Now, comparisons are already being drawn between Resurrection and modern box office giants like Top Gun: Maverick, which found multi-weekend success and redefined the sequel as a blockbuster renaissance. A well-executed Passion sequel could follow suit. Still, not everyone involved came out unscathed from the original. Jim Caviezel has spoken candidly about how the role may have negatively impacted his career, due in part to the film's extreme subject matter and his own controversial public statements in recent years. He is aligned with conspiracy theories and fringe ideologies, stances that have placed him further outside the Hollywood mainstream. Yet none of this appears to have deterred Mel Gibson. With anticipation now reaching a boiling point, fans are scouring the internet for trailers. YouTube is filled with clips labeled The Passion of the Christ 2 Resurrection Trailer. But here's the truth, none of them are official. They are fan-made concept trailers, creatively piecing together scenes from the original film. sometimes combined with speculative visuals from other biblical or fantasy works. In the age of internet hype and cinematic myth-making, such fan speculation speaks volumes about the cultural weight of this project. The Passion of the Christ. 2 has become a story fans want to believe is real, a modern legend still in the making. But along with the excitement comes renewed controversy. Gibson's first film told the story of Jesus with brutal realism and religious fervor, a combination that earned it both global acclaim and intense criticism. While some called it a reverent biblical epic, others saw it as an appalling spectacle of violence and intolerance. Despite, or perhaps because of its polarizing nature, The Passion of the Christ remains the highest-grossing R-rated film in U.S. history and a cornerstone of modern faith-based cinema. And now with Resurrection, Gibson isn't just making a sequel. He's reopening the floodgates of theological debate, artistic expression, and cultural division. Some see the film's potential as inspiring and educational, a chance to explore the spiritual journey of Jesus Christ through the lens of modern cinema. Others worry it may once again serve as a lightning rod for extremism, giving voice to hate groups and distorting historical truths. Many critics argue that Gibson's fixation on violence and spectacle is more about pushing ideology than fostering understanding. They point out that the rare moments of peace, grace, and insight in the first film were buried beneath waves of blood and anguish. And the few historical details that were included were often criticized as inaccurate, exaggerated, or theologically biased. This is the foundation upon which The Passion of the Christ 2 now stands, a masterpiece in some eyes and a mistake in others. Criticism and controversy, inaccuracy, violence, and anti-Semitism. Jesus Christ is widely revered as the embodiment of love, hope, and divine compassion, a beacon of light in humanity's darkest hour. A cinematic portrayal of Jesus, then, should reflect these values: truth, redemption, and overwhelming grace. But in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, many critics argue that this essence was replaced with an overwhelming focus on pain, despair, and violence. From the very first scene, the tone is set. Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane when he is approached by an androgynous figure draped in a black cloak, an implied embodiment of Satan. A giant serpent slithers toward Jesus before he crushes it underfoot. While this imagery draws loosely from the book of Genesis, there is no biblical basis for such an encounter in Gethsemane. This dramatization, though visually striking, is one of many invented elements created for suspense rather than scriptural fidelity. One of the most disturbing additions is the demon baby, shown being cradled by Satan while mocking Jesus during his torture. With its ghostly pale skin and deformed features, the creature has no place in any biblical narrative. But it remains one of the most haunting, controversial visuals in the film. The crucifixion sequence, too, is heavily embellished. The film shows Jesus carrying the entire cross, though many historians suggest he likely bore only the crossbeam. The nailing of his hands and feet is another point of debate, with scholars pointing out that crucifixion victims were often tied, not nailed, to the wood. Moreover, nowhere in the Gospels is Jesus' brutal torture described in such graphic, prolonged detail. Even Jesus' physical appearance in the film is questionable. There is no historical or biblical evidence for his fair skin, straight brown hair, trimmed beard, or the clean white loincloth he wears throughout his ordeal. In contrast, most scholars believe Jesus would have had darker skin, in line with the people of first-century Judea. The notion that he remained partially clothed throughout the crucifixion also contradicts the documented Roman practice of maximum public humiliation. Additionally, Jesus is portrayed as fluent in Latin, a highly unlikely detail. Aramaic was his native tongue, and he may have known a few words of Greek or Hebrew, but Latin would not have been part of his everyday speech. Perhaps one of the most damning controversies surrounding The Passion of the Christ 2 is its alleged anti-Semitism, a charge made even more serious by Gibson's well-documented personal scandals and inflammatory remarks toward Jewish people in the past. Ironically, the film's treatment of Jewish characters contradicts the historical truth that Jesus was himself Jewish, born Jewish, raised in Jewish tradition, and executed under Roman authority. Yet, the film seems to push the narrative that the Jewish people were Jesus' primary enemies. This portrayal of angry, bloodthirsty mobs calling for Jesus' death was deeply troubling to many in both Jewish and Christian communities. Religious leaders and organizations across the globe publicly condemned the film for perpetuating dangerous stereotypes and stoking ancient prejudices. Due to this portrayal, Gibson struggled to secure mainstream distribution for the original film. The backlash from faith leaders, theologians, and political figures was swift and unrelenting. And now, as the sequel approaches, many fear that these inflammatory depictions may return, perhaps in even more extreme forms. Papal reactions, brutality, and the rising storm of a sequel. One of the most unexpected controversies surrounding the Passion of the Christ was the alleged endorsement by Pope John Paul II. Early reports from various news outlets and publications claim that, after a private screening, the Pope had uttered the now infamous phrase, "It is as it was." The implication was clear. He believed the film's depiction of Jesus' final hours was both biblically and emotionally authentic. Some reports even went further, stating the Pope had personally told others that he enjoyed the movie. The news sparked an immediate firestorm. For many, the idea that the spiritual leader of the Catholic Church would endorse such an intensely graphic and polarizing film was deeply troubling. In response to the public uproar, the Vatican released an official statement in January, attempting to clarify the matter. Yet rather than settling the issue, the press release only added more confusion. One excerpt read, "It is the Holy Father's custom not to express public judgments on artistic works, judgments which are always open to diverse evaluations of an aesthetic nature." The statement confirmed that the Pope had indeed watched the film, but neither confirmed nor denied the accuracy of the "it is as it was" remark. It offered no clarification on whether the Pope truly supported the film's content or its portrayal of events. Meanwhile, The Passion of the Christ drew intense scrutiny for its extreme violence. Nearly the entire film focuses on Jesus being whipped, stabbed, beaten, and tortured in agonizing detail. Critics accuse the film of exploiting violence, rather than using it as a tool for deeper understanding or spiritual reflection. Audience members described intense physical reactions to the film, crying, fainting, and even vomiting. One woman reportedly suffered a fatal heart attack during the crucifixion scene. Legendary film critic Roger Ebert famously wrote that it was the most violent film he had ever seen. If Mel Gibson's goal was to be controversial, he undoubtedly succeeded. The film became one of the most debated cinematic works of its time, hailed by some as holy and condemned by others as grotesque. Now, nearly 2 decades later, a sequel is confirmed, and it is already generating even more controversy. Titled The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, the film will chronicle the 3 days between Jesus' death and his resurrection, focusing heavily on his descent into hell, where, according to some Christian traditions, he battled Satan and rescued the righteous. Jim Caviezel returns in the role of Jesus. Sadly, Krzysztof Zhivkov, who portrayed the Apostle John, passed away in March after battling cancer, though he had been scheduled to reprise his role. Principal photography officially began in April. The sequel is being independently produced, with filming taking place at Cinecittà Studios in Rome, as well as on location in Matera and the ghost town of Krakow, in the Basilicata region of southern Italy. Additional scenes are also planned to be shot in Mexico. Despite the film's spiritual significance for many viewers, Resurrection is already shaping up to be even more divisive than the original. The first film resonated deeply with American evangelicals and found surprising global success, bolstered by its unapologetic style and its emotionally intense interpretation of the Gospel of John. It also wove in Catholic traditions, including the visions of mystics like Anne Catherine Emmerich, visions that inspired many of the film's more fantastical moments. Yet this blending of mysticism, violence, and theology has brought the project under fire once again, with critics voicing concerns that Resurrection may not only revive old controversies, but escalate them.